Emma Caldwell slammed both hands flat on the auctioneer's table and stared straight into the eyes of every man who had laughed at her that morning. "I said $50, she repeated. "For all 15. The yard went dead silent. 15 black horses stood behind the rusted fence, scarred, starving, and shaking. Every serious rancher in Red Willow County had already turned their backs on them, and Emma had just spent the last money she had in this world to bring them home. If you're new here, please subscribe and follow this story all the way to the end, and drop a comment telling me what city you're watching from. I want to see how far this story travels. Now let's go back to where it all began. The morning of the auction, Emma Caldwell woke up before the sun did. She had not slept more than 2 hours. She lay in the dark on the old iron bed her grandfather had built by hand, staring up at a ceiling she barely recognized, in a house that felt like it belonged to someone else entirely. Someone who had known what they were doing. Someone who had a plan. Someone who had not just driven 14 hours through a Montana winter to inherit a crumbling property with no livestock, no income, and $43 left in her checking account. She had read her grandfather's letter so many times the paper had gone soft at the folds. "Emma," it began, "if you are reading this, then I did not get the chance to explain it to you myself. I am sorry for that. There is so much I should have told you years ago, but I want you to know that everything I have left, I am leaving to you. Not because you are the only one, because you are the only one who will understand." She had not understood. Not yet. Her grandfather, Franklin Caldwell, had died in November of a heart attack in the barn, alone, at 71 years old. He had been trying to fix a gate latch. His ranch hand, a quiet man named Deke, who had worked the property for 12 years, had found him the next morning. By the time Emma got the call, Franklin had already been buried in the small cemetery at the edge of the property, next to his wife, next to his son, Emma's father, who had died when Emma was 9. That was the thing about the Caldwell family. They kept dying on that land. And now Emma was here, 26 years old, trained as a landscape architect in Denver, with no ranching experience, no savings, and no idea what her grandfather had meant when he wrote that she was the only one who would understand. She got dressed in the dark. She pulled on her boots. She drove into town. The Red Willow County Livestock Auction was held every first Saturday of the month in a long wooden yard at the edge of Hartley, the county seat, population 1,100 and falling. By the time Emma arrived, the yard was already crowded with men in heavy coats and wide-brimmed hats, their breath rising in the cold morning air, their boots muddy from the overnight rain. She knew almost none of them. She had grown up in Denver. She had visited her grandfather's ranch maybe a dozen times in her life, always in summer, always briefly. She was a stranger here, and everyone could tell. She stood near the fence and watched the first animals move through the ring. Cattle mostly. A few draft horses. A pair of mules that nobody wanted. She was about to leave. And then they brought in the black horses, 15 of them. Moving in a loose, rattling group through the gate at the far end of the yard, led by 2 ranch hands who looked like they would rather be anywhere else on earth. The horses were thin. Their ribs showed. Their coats were dull and matted from neglect, their hooves grown too long from months of inadequate care. 3 of them had visible scarring along their flanks. One had a deep gouge above his left eye that had healed badly, leaving a raised white mark against the black. They were not beautiful, not the way people meant when they talked about beautiful horses. But Emma could not take her eyes off them. She had always been this way, even as a child. She was drawn to things that had been discarded. Her mother used to say it like it was a problem. "Emma, you can't save every broken thing you find." But Emma had never believed that. She just believed most people gave up too fast. The auctioneer stepped up onto his platform and looked at the 15 horses, the way a man looks at something he expects to throw away. "All right, folks," he said. "Last group of the morning. 15 black horses, mixed ages, mixed condition. Previous owner couldn't manage 'em. Whole lot goes together. We're not splitting 'em up. Starting bid, $25. Silence. The ranchers near Emma shifted and murmured. Someone laughed quietly. "These the Hooper horses?" a man near her asked. "The same," another answered. Hooper tried to sell 'em private twice. Couldn't move a single one, said they were too mean to work and too dumb to train. One of 'em put his hired man in the hospital. Which one? The big one. The stallion with the mark on his head. Emma looked at the stallion. He was standing slightly apart from the others, his head low, his dark eyes moving steadily around the yard. I was not panicking. He was watching. There was something precise about the way he held himself, something calculated. She thought, that horse is not stupid. That horse is angry. The auctioneer tried again. $25. Anyone? 25 for the lot. More silence. Come on now. Now, $25. Someone take these animals off my hands. A man in a heavy gray coat near the front said, loudly enough for everyone to hear, I wouldn't take 'em for free. Nothing but trouble. Laughter moved through the crowd. Emma looked at the 15 horses. She looked at the stallion. She looked at the white mark on his head, like a star that had fallen and burned itself there. She raised her hand. $50, she said. The laughter stopped. The auctioneer stared at her. Ma'am? $50, she repeated, for all 15. Every head in that yard turned toward her. She felt the weight of it. 100 pairs of eyes, measuring her, cataloging her. She was young. She was a woman. She was wearing a coat that was too thin for a Montana winter and boots that had never seen real mud before last week. The auctioneer recovered. We have $50. Anyone else? $50 for the lot. Nobody moved. Going once, going twice. A voice from near the fence called out, Little lady, you know what you're buying? Emma turned. The man who had spoken was tall, maybe 60 years old, wearing a long coat over broad shoulders. His face was weathered and hard, with the particular expression of a man who had spent decades making decisions for other people and expected those decisions to be respected. He had a silver belt buckle the size of a fist. Emma had not met Walter Briggs yet, but she would come to know that face very well. Yes, she said. I know what I'm buying. 15 problem horses, Briggs said, not unkindly, the way a man talks when he thinks he is doing you a favor by explaining something simple. 3 of them have been declared untrainable by 2 separate professionals. One put a man in a hospital bed for 3 weeks. The rest haven't done an honest day's work in years. You sure you want to spend your money on that? I'm sure, Emma said. What's your plan for 'em? That's my business. Briggs looked at her for a long moment. Then he nodded slowly, the way men nod when they have already decided you are going to fail, and they want to be able to say later that they warned you. Sold, the auctioneer said. To the young woman, $50. It was not applause that followed. It was something closer to collective pity. People turned back to their conversations. Someone near Emma said, not quietly enough, Franklin Caldwell's granddaughter drove all the way from Denver to throw his land away on bad horses. Another voice answered, give her 6 months. Emma paid the auctioneer. She signed the papers. She walked to the trailer she had borrowed from a neighbor she had met only once, a quiet older woman named Ruth, who had said, You don't have to explain yourself to me. Your grandfather was a good man. You take what you need. She loaded 15 black horses into a trailer she barely knew how to operate, and she drove them home. The whole drive back, the trailer shuddered and rocked behind her. She could hear the horses moving, shifting, one of them occasionally striking the metal wall with a hoof. She kept both hands on the wheel and her eyes on the road, and she did not let herself think about the fact that she had $43 in her account, a ranch that needed $15,000 in repairs just to be safe, and no earthly idea how to care for 15 horses she had just bought on impulse. She thought about her grandfather instead. She thought about the journals. Franklin Caldwell had kept journals for 40 years, 12 of them, leather-bound, filled with his small, precise handwriting. Emma had found them in his bedroom the night she arrived at the ranch, and she had read them the way a person reads something they were not supposed to find. Fast, with their heart pounding, turning pages in the lamplight while the wind pushed at the old windows. He wrote about the land. He wrote about horses. He wrote about water. He wrote, People will tell you a horse is useless because it refuses to cooperate. What they mean is that it refuses to be afraid of them. There is a difference. Fear is easy to produce. Respect has to be earned. He wrote, "The strongest things are often the ones nobody has patience enough to understand." And he wrote, in an entry dated 3 years before his death, in handwriting that was shakier than the earlier entries, but more urgent somehow, underlined twice, "The water under the North Mountain is the real wealth of this valley. I have known this for 20 years. I have protected it for 20 years. When I am gone, someone will have to keep protecting it. I hope they are strong enough." Emma had not understood that entry when she first read it. She had assumed it was metaphor. Old men wrote in metaphors. She understood it later. But that was later. For now, she had 15 black horses and a broken ranch and a town that had already written her obituary. She pulled through the gate of the Caldwell property as the afternoon light went thin and gray over the mountains. She stopped the truck and sat for a moment with the engine running, looking at the house, the barn, the fences. The house needed paint. The front porch had 2 boards rotted through. The barn roof had a section where the shingles had lifted in a storm and never been replaced. The north fence line, the one she had walked the previous morning, had posts that were soft with age and wire that sagged in long, tired curves. It was a disaster. Emma got out of the truck. She walked to the back of the trailer. She unlatched the gate carefully, the way she had watched a livestock handler do it once at a county fair when she was 12. The horses came out in a rush of noise and movement, hooves loud on the wooden ramp, bodies pressing together and then separating as they spilled into the corral. Emma pressed herself against the fence post and watched them move. 15 black shapes against the pale winter grass, manes tangled, ribs visible, still jittery from the trailer and the unfamiliar smells. The stallion came out last. He stood at the bottom of the ramp and looked at her. Emma looked back. "I know," she said. "I'm a stranger. You don't have any reason to trust me." The stallion's ears moved. "I'm not going to pretend I know what I'm doing," Emma continued. She had always talked to animals. Her mother had thought it was strange. Her grandfather, she had learned from the journals, had done the same thing. "I don't. I've never done anything like this. But I'm not going to hurt you, and I'm not going to give up on you, and that's all I can promise right now." The stallion watched her for a long moment. Then he walked into the corral. Emma latched the gate behind him. She stood there in the cold, watching the horses move, and she felt something she had not expected to feel. Not fear, not doubt, but something quieter than both of those. Something that felt almost like belonging. She named the stallion Shadow that night. She did not know why. It just fit. She went inside and made a fire and ate the last of the groceries she had brought from Denver and sat at her grandfather's kitchen table with his journals spread open around her. She read until her eyes burned. She read about the horses he had owned, the land he had walked, the trails he had found and mapped. She read about the North Mountain. She read about the water, and she found, tucked inside the back cover of the 12th journal, folded small and soft from years of handling, a hand-drawn map. The map showed the ranch property, the mountain ridgeline to the north, and a trail, barely a line, drawn in her grandfather's careful hand, that wound up through the foothills and disappeared into the mountains above. Next to the trail, in letters so small she had to lean close to read them, her grandfather had written, "The old path still remembers what men have forgotten." Emma stared at the map for a long time. Outside, the wind moved through the pines. Inside, the fire popped and settled. Somewhere in the corral, one of the horses moved, hooves on frozen ground, and then went still. Emma folded the map and put it in her shirt pocket. She did not know yet what it meant. She did not know yet what was at the end of that trail, or why her grandfather had spent 20 years protecting it, or why he had trusted her specifically with the knowledge of it. But she knew one thing. She had 15 black horses that everyone had given up on. She had a broken ranch that everyone expected her to lose. She had a map that led somewhere nobody else knew about. And she had her grandfather's voice in her head, steady and certain, written in ink that had faded only slightly across 4 decades of paper. The strongest things are often the ones nobody has patience enough to understand. Emma Caldwell was not going to give this county the satisfaction of being right about her. She closed the journal. She stood up from the table. She walked to the window and looked out at the dark corral where 15 black horses stood in the cold and breathed slow clouds of steam into the night air, alive and stubborn and completely, magnificently unwanted. "All right," she said quietly, to herself, to the horses, to the ghost of her grandfather, who felt very present in that old kitchen. "All right, let's figure this out." The next morning, she woke before dawn again. This time, she did not feel lost. She felt like she was starting something. The first week was brutal. Emma had done her reading. She had spent 3 nights before leaving Denver going through every horse care resource she could find online. But reading and doing were separated by a distance that felt like a canyon. The horses wanted nothing to do with her. When she entered the corral, they moved away. When she approached with feed, some of them took it while others turned their backs. Shadow ignored her completely, which was somehow more unsettling than if he had charged. She had called around before leaving Denver looking for help. Most people had told her politely that they were not available. One trainer had asked about the horses, heard 15 black horses from the Hooper spread, and gone quiet before saying, "Ma'am, I'd think real hard about that if I were you." But one name kept coming up, Samuel Boone. Every person who knew anything about horses in Red Willow County had mentioned Samuel Boone at least once, always with the same complicated expression, respect and wariness in equal measure. He was 70 years old. He had trained horses on 3 continents. He had retired to a small property outside Hartley 7 years ago and had not taken a client since. He had known Franklin Caldwell for 30 years. Emma drove to his property on the 4th day, uninvited, and knocked on his door. The man who answered was shorter than she had expected. Lean, with white hair and hands that looked like they had been built by a different process than regular hands. Thick through the palm, scarred across the knuckles, moving in small, precise gestures when he talked. He looked at Emma the way her grandfather used to look at a fence post before deciding whether it needed replacing. "You're Franklin's granddaughter," he said. "Yes, sir." "I heard you bought those Hooper horses." "Yes, sir." 15 of them." "Yes, sir." Samuel Boone was quiet for a moment. "People think you're crazy." "I know," Emma said. "Are you?" Emma thought about it honestly. "I don't think so, but I need help, and I think you might be the only person in this county who actually knows what those horses are." Something moved in the old man's eyes. It was not quite a smile. It was something older than a smile. Recognition, maybe, or memory. "Come in," he said. "I'll make coffee." They sat at Samuel's kitchen table for 2 hours. He did not promise anything. He asked questions about the horses, about what she had observed, about her grandfather. He listened with the particular quality of attention that made Emma feel like every word she said was being measured and weighed and filed carefully away. Finally he said, "The Hooper horses. You know why they couldn't be trained?" "Because nobody had the patience to try," Emma said. Samuel shook his head. "Because the man who owned them before Hooper was cruel to them, and Hooper didn't know what he had inherited. Those horses weren't bred for obedience. They were bred for intelligence. That's a different thing entirely." "What does that mean?" "It means they won't follow orders just because you give them. They have to decide you're worth following." He looked at her steadily. "You understand the difference?" "Yes," Emma said. And she did. "The big stallion," Samuel said. "The one with the mark. What did you name him?" "Shadow." Samuel nodded once. "Shadow. Your grandfather would have liked that." He was quiet for a moment. "I knew that horse's bloodline. His great-grandsire was a mountain horse, bred for high-altitude terrain, rocky ground, long distances. People used them in the old days on trails that machines can't go today." He looked at the table. "When Hooper got him, he tried to make him into a show horse, kept him in a stall, put a bit in his mouth that was too heavy. The horse refused. Hooper said he was broken." Samuel shook his head slowly. "The horse wasn't broken. The horse was insulted." Emma almost smiled. "Will you help me?" Samuel looked at her for a long moment. "Your grandfather was a good man," he said finally. "One of the best I ever knew. and he wrote me a letter before he died." Emma went still. "He wrote to you?" "3 months before he passed." Samuel got up from the table and opened a drawer in the kitchen cabinet and came back with an envelope, which he set on the table in front of Emma. "He told me you might come. He told me what you'd need." Emma looked at the envelope but did not pick it up. "What did he say?" she asked. "He said you were the only one who would understand," Samuel replied. "And he asked me, if you showed up and you seemed like the kind of person who was going to stay, to help you." He folded his hands on the table. "So, are you going to stay?" Emma thought about the $43, the rotted porch boards, the sagging fences, the way Walter Briggs had looked at her in the auction yard, like she was a problem that would solve itself if you just waited long enough. She thought about the map in her shirt pocket. She thought about Shadow standing at the bottom of the trailer ramp, watching her with his dark, measuring eyes. "I'm going to stay," she said. Samuel Boone nodded. "Then I'll be there tomorrow morning, 6 o'clock. He picked up his coffee cup. "You'd better get some sleep. We have a lot of work ahead of us." He was there at 6 o'clock. He was there every morning after that. The work he brought with him was nothing like what Emma had expected. She had imagined training drills, lead ropes, systematic exercises. What Samuel actually did, those first mornings, was almost nothing. He would walk into the corral and stand still. Just stand there, not approaching, not retreating. Just being present, in the same space as the horses, with the particular stillness of someone who had nothing to prove. "You have to let them come to you first," he told Emma. "Every time you go to them before they're ready, you're telling them they don't get to choose. And these horses, they need to choose." Emma learned to be still. It was harder than anything physical she had ever done. On the third morning, one of the mares, a smaller one, with a crescent-shaped scar on her left shoulder, walked across the corral and put her nose against Emma's hand. Emma held very still. "Good," Samuel said quietly from the fence. "Don't make a big thing of it. Just let her decide what she wants to do." The mare breathed against Emma's palm. Then she walked away. Emma turned to look at Samuel. He was watching with an expression that was the closest thing to warmth she had seen on his face. "That's how it starts," he said. Shadow took longer. 3 weeks passed before he allowed Emma within 10 feet of him without turning away. Another week before he let her put a hand on his neck. The day he finally accepted a halter from her. Standing still, ears moving, watching her face the entire time. Samuel, who was standing at the fence, said nothing. But when Emma looked over at him, the old man pressed his lips together and nodded once, and she understood that this meant something important. "What was he like?" Emma asked one evening, when they were doing the last feed of the day and the light was going orange over the ridge. "My grandfather, when you knew him." Samuel was quiet for a moment, measuring out grain. "Quiet man," he said finally. "Didn't say much unless he had something worth saying. Knew this land better than anyone. Used to say..." He paused. "Used to say that the land has a memory, that it remembers what people have forgotten. He believed the old trails, the ones from before the roads came in, were still there if you knew how to look." Emma reached into her coat pocket and took out the folded map. She held it out to Samuel. He took it, unfolded it carefully, looked at it for a long time without speaking. "He showed me this once," he said finally. 10, maybe 12 years ago. He said he had found something up there that nobody else knew about." He looked at Emma. "Did he tell you what it was?" "No," Emma said. "Just that it was worth protecting." Samuel folded the map and handed it back. "He was not a man who exaggerated," he said. "If Franklin said it was worth protecting, it was worth protecting." Emma looked at the map in her hand. "When the horses are ready," Samuel said, "we follow it." Around town, the stories about Emma had grown. She heard them when she drove into Hartley for supplies. Versions of her story that had passed through enough hands to become something almost unrecognizable. She had spent everything and was already broke. She was trying to sell the horses secretly. She had been seen crying in her truck in the parking lot of the feed store. She had called a Denver real estate agent about listing the ranch. None of it was true. But the lie that bothered her most was the one she heard from the woman at the hardware store counter, said quietly to another customer, who she clearly did not realize was standing close enough to hear. "Walter Briggs already has someone looking at that property. He figures by spring she'll be gone." Emma paid for her hinges and her wire and her nails, and she walked out to her truck and sat for a moment with her hands in her lap. Walter Briggs wanted her land. She had suspected it. The way he had looked at her at the auction, the particular quality of his warning, which was not concern, but calculation. But hearing it said plainly, even secondhand, even through gossip, made it real in a different way. She drove home. She went into the corral and stood with the horses in the last light of the afternoon, and Shadow, for the first time, walked to her without being approached. He put his head next to her shoulder, not resting it there, just placing it close, the way a horse does when it is deciding whether to trust someone completely. Emma put her hand on the side of his neck. "I know," she said. "I know." She stood there until the light was gone, and the stars came out over the Montana mountains, cold and sharp and very far away, and she made herself a promise that she kept every single morning after that. She was not leaving. Whatever Walter Briggs thought was going to happen, whatever the town expected, whatever the bank eventually said about the loans her grandfather had left behind, she was not leaving. She had 15 horses that everyone had given up on. She had a map that led somewhere nobody else knew about. She had her grandfather's voice in her head telling her that the strongest things were the ones nobody had patience enough to understand. And she was starting, for the first time since she had arrived in Red Willow County, cold and grieving and completely unprepared, to believe that she might actually be one of them. Samuel Boone arrived at 6 o'clock every morning without fail, and every morning Emma was already up. That was the first thing he noticed about her, and later he would tell people it was the first thing that made him believe she might actually survive this. Most people, when they took on something impossible, needed time to work up to it. They needed coffee and convincing and a slow entry into the hard parts of the day. Emma was different. By the time Samuel's truck rolled through the gate, she had already done the first feeding, already checked the water troughs, already walked the fence line in the dark with a flashlight looking for soft posts and loose wire. She was not performing effort for anyone's benefit. She simply could not sleep past 4 in the morning, and once she was awake, she worked. Samuel respected that more than he said out loud. What he said out loud, on the third morning, was, "You're doing the feed wrong." Emma stopped. She was standing in the middle of the corral with a bucket, and 3 of the horses had come to her readily, but 6 others were hanging back near the far fence, and Shadow had not moved at all. "What do you mean?" she asked. "You're going to them," Samuel said. "You're carrying the bucket out to where they are. You're making it easy. Isn't that what I'm supposed to do?" "No." He opened the gate and walked in without hurry, and the horses that had been pressing toward Emma's bucket shifted slightly, but did not scatter. They had already decided Samuel was safe, which had taken less than a week because Samuel moved through the world in a way that made animals understand instinctively that he posed no threat. What you're supposed to do is set the bucket down and walk away. Let them decide to come to you. Every time you bring the food to them, you're teaching them that they don't have to make any choices. You're removing the part that matters. Emma set the bucket down. She walked back to the fence. She stood next to Samuel, and they waited. It took 4 minutes. Then the 3 horses who had come to her before moved to the bucket, and after another 2 minutes, 4 more followed. 6 horses still hung back. Shadow did not move. "That's fine," Samuel said. "We'll do it again at the afternoon feed. Eventually he'll get hungry enough to decide." "And if he doesn't?" "He will." Samuel glanced at her. "He's not stupid. He's principled. There's a difference. A stupid horse just panics. A principled horse waits until he decides the terms are acceptable." Emma looked at Shadow across the corral. The stallion was watching them with an expression that was, against all reason, recognizable. It was the expression of someone who had been burned too many times and had decided that no offer was worth accepting until they understood exactly what it was going to cost them. She understood that expression. She had worn it herself for years. "Okay," she said. "We wait." On the 5th day, Shadow walked to the bucket. He did it without fanfare, without any signal that he had made a decision. One moment he was standing at the far fence, the next he was moving, unhurried, deliberate, as if he had simply calculated that enough time had passed and the terms were now acceptable. He reached the bucket and ate. He did not look at Emma. Emma, standing at the fence 20 feet away, held completely still. Samuel, beside her, said nothing for a moment. Then quietly, "There it is." "That's it?" Emma whispered. "That's everything," Samuel said. The weeks that followed had their own rhythm. Emma fell into it the way you fall into water, suddenly, and then completely. The days began before light and ended after dark, and the work in between was relentless. Feeding, cleaning, fence repair, equipment maintenance, and always the slow, careful work of being present with the horses in a way that communicated nothing except reliability. She was here yesterday. She was here today. She would be here tomorrow. That was the message. That was the whole message. Samuel taught her things she had not expected to need. He taught her to read a horse's ear position and understand what it meant. He taught her the difference between a horse that was afraid and a horse that was angry, and why confusing the two could get you hurt. He taught her that the moment you rushed was the moment you lost everything you had built. "Your grandfather understood this," Samuel told her one morning. They were sitting on the top rail of the corral fence, watching 3 of the mares move together in a loose group, working out their own hierarchy without human interference. He used to say that impatience was the most expensive thing a person could indulge in. Cost him years once, with a horse he was trying to bring back from bad handling. Nearly gave up. Then he slowed down, and in 2 weeks the horse was different. "What happened to that horse?" Emma asked. Samuel was quiet for a moment. "That horse was Shadow's grandsire," he said. "Franklin bought him as a 4-year-old from a man who said he was ruined. Worked with him for 3 years. Sold him eventually, but not before he'd figured out the bloodline." He looked at Emma. "That's not an accident, Emma. Your grandfather knew what he was doing when he pointed you toward those horses." Emma turned to look at him. "You think he planned this?" "I think Franklin Caldwell was the most deliberate man I ever met," Samuel said. "I don't think he did anything without a reason." That night, Emma went back through the journals with this idea in her mind, and the pages looked different. She had been reading them as a record, a man documenting his life, his land, his thoughts. Now she read them as a message, specifically addressed, specifically intended. Her grandfather wrote about the horses the way he wrote about the land, as things with inherent value that most people could not see because they were looking for the wrong qualities. He wrote about trails that no modern vehicle could navigate, but that a good mountain horse could cover in hours. He wrote about the independence that came from not needing roads, from being able to access your own land without depending on infrastructure that other people controlled. He wrote, in an entry from 8 years before his death, "A man who controls the roads controls the commerce. A man who needs no roads answers to no one." And then, 3 pages later, in what felt like the continuation of a thought he had been turning over for days, "The spring is what they want. It has always been what they want. I have kept this deed recorded in Billings, not Helena, because a smaller office is harder to corrupt. When I am gone, whoever holds this land must understand that the water rights are the core of it. Everything else is negotiable. The water is not." Emma read that entry 4 times. Then she drove to Billings. She told Samuel she needed a day in the city. She did not explain further, and Samuel, who was the kind of man who understood that some information was private until the person holding it decided otherwise, did not ask. In Billings, she went to the county recorder's office that her grandfather had mentioned, not the Helena office, the Billings one, and she asked to see the water rights records associated with the Caldwell property in Red Willow County. The clerk was a middle-aged woman with reading glasses on a beaded chain and the expression of someone who had seen a great many things and been surprised by almost none of them. She came back from the records room with a folder. "There are 3 documents here," the clerk said. "The original water rights filing from 1962, a supplemental filing from 1987, and a legal correspondence from—" she checked the date, "2019. "What's the correspondence?" Emma asked. The clerk opened the folder and skimmed it. Her expression shifted slightly. "It's a letter from an attorney representing a private party, requesting that the water rights be transferred in connection with a land sale." She looked up at Emma. The request was denied. Who was the private party? The clerk turned the letter so Emma could read the letterhead. The attorney's name was not familiar. The party they represented was Walter Briggs. Emma sat in the records office for a long moment, looking at that name on that paper. She thought about the way Briggs had looked at her at the auction, the patience in his voice, the way he had warned her, not cruelly, but with the particular confidence of someone who was operating from a position of certainty, who knew something you didn't, and was comfortable waiting for you to figure it out. He had been trying to get those water rights for at least 3 years before Emma arrived. He had known they were on the Caldwell property. He had known, or suspected, what they connected to. And he had been waiting for Franklin Caldwell to die. Emma copied every document in the folder, paid the copy fee, and drove back to the ranch. She did not tell Samuel what she had found. Not yet. She needed to understand more of it first. She needed to understand exactly what they were dealing with before she said anything out loud, because saying it out loud would make it real. And once it was real, there would be consequences, and she needed to be ready for them. So she kept working. She kept the map in her shirt pocket. She kept her grandfather's journals on the kitchen table and read them every night after the last feed. And she watched the horses change. It was not dramatic, the way the horses changed. It happened the way all real change happens, gradually, and then suddenly, so that looking back later, you could not identify the exact moment of shift, only the before and the after. The before was 15 frightened, damaged, mistrustful animals who flinched at sudden movements and kept themselves pressed against fence lines. The after was something different. Something that began around the 6th week, when Emma noticed that the horses were no longer clustering at the edges of the corral. They were spreading out, using the whole space, moving with a different quality of ease. Shadow led this change, as he led everything. Once he had decided that Emma was acceptable, he had apparently communicated this to the rest of the group in whatever language horses use for such things, and the others had updated their assessment accordingly. He still did not invite affection. He allowed proximity, which was different. He would stand near Emma while she worked, not because he wanted attention, but because her presence had become a neutral thing, neither threatening nor particularly interesting, simply part of the landscape of the day. Samuel watched this progress with the quietly satisfied expression of someone watching a thing unfold the way they expected it to. "You're almost ready to try leading him," he said one morning. "On a halter?" Emma asked. "On a halter, in the corral first, then we'll see." She was not almost ready. She was terrified. But she had learned in the past 2 months that the emotion she needed to master was not fear. Fear was informative. Fear kept you from doing things that would genuinely get you killed, but rather the reflexive projection of fear that animals could read and respond to. A horse could feel your anxiety the way you could feel a change in air pressure before a storm. If you were afraid of Shadow, Shadow would know it, and his knowing it would change everything. So Emma learned to be afraid quietly, to let the fear exist without showing it, to breathe through it, to stay in her body while the adrenaline moved through her and came out the other side. The day she put the halter on Shadow for the first time, she was shaking so hard she nearly dropped the buckle. He stood perfectly still. She got the halter on. She stepped back. He looked at her. "Good," she said. Her voice came out steady. She did not know how. "Good boy." Shadow exhaled through his nose. A long, slow breath, like something releasing. Samuel, at the fence, exhaled at the same moment, and Emma understood that the old man had been holding his breath too. The training accelerated after that. Once Shadow accepted the halter, the other horses followed within days, partly because horses are creatures of imitation, partly because Shadow's acceptance functioned as a kind of permission, a signal that this was safe, that the woman with the dark coat and the quiet voice was not going to hurt them. But the real revelation came when Samuel brought Emma to the north field and let the horses run. "Watch," he said. "Just watch." He opened the gate between the corral and the larger field, and the horses moved through it and began to run. Not the frantic running of animals escaping something, but the long, deliberate running of animals doing what they were built to do. And what Emma saw, watching them move across uneven ground in the early spring cold, was something she had not expected. They were extraordinary. Shadow moved over the rocky ground, the way water moves, finding the path of least resistance, not by avoiding obstacles, but by reading them so quickly that the reading and the responding happened simultaneously. He moved over a section of ground that Emma knew had 3 buried rocks and a soft spot from underground water, and he navigated it without a single misstep, without even appearing to notice it. The other horses followed his line, reading him the way he read the ground, the entire group moving with a unified intelligence that was breathtaking to watch. "My God," Emma said. "Mountain horses," Samuel said beside her. "This is what they were bred for. This is what all those trainers who couldn't work with them couldn't see. They kept trying to make them perform on flat, predictable ground. But put them on difficult terrain, and everything changes." Emma watched Shadow reach the far end of the field, wheel, and come back, and her mind was moving fast. Her grandfather's map. The old trail into the mountains. The spring that Walter Briggs had been trying to acquire for 3 years. The entry in the journal. A man who needs no roads answers to no one. She turned to Samuel. "The trail on the map," she said. "Could they navigate it?" Samuel looked at the horses. He looked at Shadow, who had stopped near the fence and was watching them both with his characteristic focused attention. "Give me another month," he said. And yes, that night, Emma drove into Hartley for supplies, and she ran into Walter Briggs. It was not an accident. She understood that later. At the time it felt random. She was coming out of the feed store with a 50-pound bag of minerals over her shoulder, and he was crossing the parking lot with 2 other men she did not recognize. Men in clean coats who looked like they had not done a day's physical labor in years. Lawyers, maybe, or investors. The kind of men who traveled with Briggs. "Miss Caldwell," Briggs said pleasantly. He stopped. The 2 men with him stopped. "How are the horses treating you?" "Fine," Emma said. She set the bag in her truck bed. "I heard you brought in Samuel Boone," Briggs said. "That's smart. He knows horses." "He does," Emma said. Briggs studied her for a moment. He had a way of looking at people that was not hostile. It was evaluative, the way you look at a piece of land you are thinking about buying, taking in the angles and the drainage and the access points. "You know," he said, "my offer still stands. I've been patient because I understand you needed time to settle in, deal with the grief. Your grandfather was a good man. But spring is coming, and I have plans for that area that are time-sensitive." "What plans?" Emma asked. Briggs smiled. It was not a dishonest smile exactly. It was the smile of a man who was accustomed to being the most powerful person in any given conversation, and had learned to wear that power lightly, like a coat he barely noticed. "Development," he said. "Water management. This whole county is about to change significantly in terms of land value. Being on the right side of that change is going to matter. And you think my land is on the right side. I think your grandfather's land has potential that you may not be fully positioned to realize," Briggs said carefully. Emma looked at him. "Thank you for the offer," she said. "I'll keep it in mind." She got in her truck and drove away. In the rearview mirror, she watched Briggs watch her go. He was not angry. He was recalibrating. She could tell from the way he stood, still, slightly tilted forward, the posture of a man revising his timeline. She drove home and sat in the dark kitchen and thought about everything she knew. Briggs had tried to acquire the water rights 3 years ago, and been denied because her grandfather had filed the paperwork in the right office and protected it properly. Briggs had been waiting for Franklin to die. When Franklin died and Emma appeared, young, inexperienced, from the city, arriving with no money and no plan, Briggs had assumed the problem would solve itself. He had assumed she would fail and sell. He had not counted on the horses. He had not counted on Samuel. He had not counted on Emma being Franklin Caldwell's granddaughter in anything more than name. She opened the 12th journal to the page with the water entry and read it again in the lamplight. Then she did something she had been thinking about for 2 weeks but had not quite worked up to. She called her grandfather's attorney, a man named Robert Hale in Billings, whose number she had found in the estate paperwork. He answered on the second ring, which surprised her. It was 8:30 at night. "I was expecting your call," he said. "Not this late, but eventually." "You knew my grandfather well?" Emma asked. 22 years, Hale said. "I was one of the most careful clients I ever had. He thought about everything. He prepared for everything." A pause. "He told me you'd come to the land and stay. I'll admit I wasn't certain he was right, but he was certain." "He seems to have been certain about a lot of things," Emma said. "He was. Are you calling about the water rights?" Emma went still. "You know about those." "He told me everything," Hale said. "He told me about the spring, the map, the deed filing in Billings. He told me about Walter Briggs and the approach Briggs' attorneys had made. He told me that if you found what was on the North Mountain and understood what it meant, you would need legal protection immediately." Emma pressed her hand flat against the kitchen table to steady herself. "How big is it?" she asked. "The spring, how significant is it?" There was a brief silence on the line. "Emma," Hale said carefully, "your grandfather had a hydrologist test the underground water source in 2018, quietly. The results are in a sealed envelope in my office that Franklin instructed me to give you in person when you came to see me." He paused again. "What I can tell you tonight is that Franklin Caldwell spent the last 5 years of his life making sure that whatever was under that mountain stayed with this family. He was not a dramatic man. He did not exaggerate. And he used the word significant in a way that I have never heard him use it about anything else." Emma sat with the phone against her ear, and the lamp throwing gold light across the open journals, and the cold coming through the old kitchen windows. And she thought about 15 black horses that nobody wanted, and a map drawn in fading ink, and a man who had spent 40 years on a piece of land that everyone around him had underestimated. "I'll come to Billings on Monday," she said. "I'll be here," Hale said. "Emma, your grandfather was right about you. I could tell from the moment you called." She thanked him and hung up. For a long time she sat without moving. Then she heard it. From outside, from the direction of the corral, a sound she had learned to recognize over the past 2 months. Hooves on frozen ground. The quiet shifting of horses moving in the dark. And then, clearly distinguishable from the others, the deliberate, measured sound of Shadow pacing the fence line closest to the house. He did that sometimes. She had noticed it. As if he was checking something. As if he was keeping watch. Emma looked out the window at the dark and the faint shapes of the horses and the stars above the ridge. "I know," she said. "I'm figuring it out." She closed the journal. She went to bed. She slept 5 hours and woke before dawn and was already at the fence line with her flashlight when Samuel's truck came through the gate at 6 o'clock. He rolled down his window. "You sleep at all?" "Some," Emma said. He looked at her for a moment. "Something happened. I talked to Robert Hale last night," Emma said. "I'm going to Billings Monday." Samuel was quiet. Then he said, "Your grandfather mentioned Hale to me once. Said if things ever became complicated, Hale was the person to call." "Things have become complicated," Emma said. Samuel nodded slowly. "Then we'd better get the horses ready faster," he said. "Whatever's on that mountain, I suspect it's going to matter sooner than either of us planned." He parked the truck. He got out. He walked into the barn the way he did every morning, with the unhurried certainty of a man who understood that there was always enough time if you did not waste any of it. Emma followed him. Outside, the horses were moving in the cold morning, breath rising in small clouds, Shadow at the front of the group as always, leading them in a slow circuit of the corral. Patient, deliberate, waiting for the day to begin. He was not the horse everyone thought he was. None of them were. And the person who had seen that, who had seen it at a county auction with $50 in her hand, and a grief-worn letter in her coat pocket, and a town full of people ready to watch her fail, was standing in the barn doorway pulling on her work gloves, already thinking 3 steps ahead, already calculating what she was going to need and how she was going to get it. Emma Caldwell was her grandfather's granddaughter, and she was just getting started. Robert Hale's office was on the 4th floor of a building in Billings that smelled like old paper and radiator heat, the kind of office that had been in the same place for 30 years and intended to stay for 30 more. He was a small man, compact and precise, with the particular economy of movement that belongs to people who have learned that most problems respond better to careful thought than to dramatic action. He stood when Emma came in and shook her hand with both of his. "You look like him," he said. "Around the eyes." "People keep telling me that," Emma said. "It's a compliment," Hale said. "Sit down." He did not waste time. He opened his desk drawer and removed a sealed envelope, thick, cream-colored, with her name written across the front in her grandfather's handwriting. Emma recognized the penmanship from the journals. She had been reading it for months, and it still hit her somewhere physical, seeing it like that. Like proof. She did not open it immediately. She held it in both hands and looked at Hale. "Tell me what you know first," she said. "Then I'll read it." Hale nodded. He folded his hands on the desk. "Your grandfather came to me in 2018 with the results of a hydrological survey he had commissioned privately. He hired a firm out of Missoula, told them it was routine, paid cash, so there was no paper trail that could be easily found. The survey identified an underground aquifer beneath the north section of his property, specifically, beneath the mountain trail he had mapped." He paused. "Emma, this is not a small spring. This is a significant water source. The survey estimated sustainable yield in figures that, in this region, given current water scarcity projections, represent substantial economic value." "How substantial?" Emma asked. Hale was quiet for a moment. "Substantial enough that 3 separate agricultural operations in this county depend on downstream water rights that trace back to that aquifer. Substantial enough that a private development company spent the better part of 18 months trying to acquire adjacent land before your grandfather's attorneys blocked their access filings." He met her eyes. "Walter Briggs is not acting alone, Emma. He is the local representative of a much larger interest. There are investors behind him. People who have been watching this county's water situation for a decade." Emma sat with that for a moment. The envelope in her hands felt heavier than it was. "My grandfather knew all of this," she said. "He knew most of it," Hale said. "He didn't know how far the investment group extended, but he knew Briggs was the front. He knew the water was what they wanted. And he knew that the moment he died and the property passed to someone they could pressure or buy out, they would move." He leaned forward slightly. "He protected that aquifer the way a man protects something irreplaceable. The water rights are recorded in 3 separate jurisdictions. The deed language is specific enough that any legal challenge would require years and significant resources to prosecute. He built you a fortress, Emma. But a fortress is only useful if someone is inside it." Emma opened the envelope. Her grandfather's letter was 4 pages, handwritten, dated 14 months before his death. She read it the way you read something you cannot read fast enough and also cannot bear to finish. He wrote about the land. He wrote about the water. He wrote about the 37 years he had spent understanding what he had and protecting it from people who wanted it for reasons that had nothing to do with the land itself. He wrote about the horses, specifically about the bloodline, about Shadow's grandsire, about the mountain trails that had not been traveled in decades, but that the right horses could navigate, and at the end, in the slightly heavier pressure of ink that meant he was writing slowly, choosing every word. "Emma, the trail on the map leads to the central survey point above the aquifer. I always meant to take you there myself. I am sorry I did not get the time. Go with the black horses. They know that ground better than any machine ever will. What you find there will answer every question, and it will give you everything you need to fight for this land. The only thing I was never sure of was whether you would want to fight. I believe you will. I believe you are built for exactly this. Do not let them tell you otherwise." She folded the letter and put it back in the envelope. Hale was watching her with the careful attention of a man who has delivered difficult news many times and understands that the moment immediately following requires absolute silence. "What do I do first?" Emma asked. "First," Hale said, "you go see what's on that mountain. Document everything. Photographs, GPS coordinates, written notes. Then you come back to me and we file a formal assertion of water rights usage, which creates a legal record that makes any future challenge significantly more costly for the other side." He paused. "And Emma, do this soon." Briggs has been patient because he believed time was on his side. The moment he realizes you've been to Billings and spoken to me, he will understand that it is not. Emma drove home faster than she should have. She told Samuel everything that night, sitting at the kitchen table with the journals and the copied documents from the recorder's office spread between them. Samuel listened without interrupting, which was his way. When she finished, he sat for a moment looking at the map, and then he looked up at her. "How long before the horses are ready for the trail?" Emma asked. Samuel looked at her steadily. "I told you a month." "That was 2 weeks ago," Emma said. A long pause. "2 weeks from now, then?" "1 week," Emma said. Samuel's jaw tightened. "Emma." "Shadow is ready," Emma said. "You know he is. The others follow him. We go in a small group. Shadow, the 3 strongest mares. We don't need all 15 for the first run." Samuel looked at the map again. He had the expression of a man being asked to shorten a timeline that existed for legitimate reasons, and knowing that the person asking understood those reasons and was asking anyway. "Fine," he said finally. 1 week. But we do the mountain preparation drills every day between now and then. No shortcuts." "No shortcuts," Emma agreed. The drills Samuel designed were precise and demanding. He had Emma lead Shadow over every uneven surface on the ranch property. The Rocky Creek crossing, the slope behind the barn, the old path through the pine stand that had not been maintained in years and was full of root systems and loose stone. He worked them in pairs, Shadow and one of the mares, teaching them to read each other's body language on difficult ground, to slow when the horse ahead slowed, to pick their path independently but in concert. Emma worked alongside them. On foot at first, then mounted. She had ridden horses before, a handful of times, always the calm, well-trained kind. But riding Shadow was a different education entirely. He did not perform obedience. He negotiated it. Every time she asked him to do something, she could feel him considering the request, and the quality of his eventual compliance told her clearly whether he agreed with her judgment or was simply tolerating it. "You're learning to ask instead of tell," Samuel said, watching her from the fence one morning. "Is that bad?" Emma asked. "It's exactly right," he said. "It means he's teaching you." 4 days before they were supposed to make the first trail run, Emma drove into Hartley for supplies and found something waiting for her. It was a legal notice, delivered to her post office box. A formal letter from an attorney she did not recognize, representing a company she did not recognize, asserting a claim on water access rights associated with a drainage easement that supposedly crossed the north section of the Caldwell property. The language was dense and technical and designed to be confusing, but the core of it was simple. Someone was claiming a right to access the land near the aquifer. Emma sat in the post office parking lot and read the letter 3 times. Then she called Hale. "I've been expecting something like this," Hale said. "Send me a photograph of the letter. This is what's called a probing action. They're testing your response. If you ignore it, it becomes a default acknowledgement. If you respond in panic, they know you're frightened. The correct response is measured, specific, and immediate." "What does that look like?" "It looks like an attorney's letter from my office, citing the specific recorded rights and denying the easement claim in precise legal language. Return to them within 48 hours. A brief pause. "This tells them you are not alone. It tells them you have counsel. And it tells them that whatever they thought they were dealing with, a young woman who didn't know what she had, they were wrong." "Send it," Emma said. "I already drafted it this morning," Hale said. "I'll send it the moment you confirm." Emma confirmed. She drove home. She did not tell Samuel about the letter immediately because she did not want the anxiety of it to affect the morning drills. She told him that evening, after the last feed, when the horses were settled and the day's work was done. Samuel listened. Then he said, "We moved the trail date up." "To when?" Emma asked. "Day after tomorrow," Samuel said. "Before they make another move. Whatever Franklin found up there, we need to find it and document it before someone decides to make that harder." Emma looked at him. "You said the horses needed more time." "The horses are ready," Samuel said quietly. "I was managing your nerves by giving us a longer timeline." He met her eyes. "Your grandfather's instinct was right about you, Emma. But instinct alone doesn't win legal battles. Evidence does. We need to go up that mountain." Emma almost said something about the fact that he had been managing her timeline without telling her. But she looked at his face, the old, careful face of a man who had known her grandfather for 30 years and had agreed to be here at 70 years old because a dead friend had asked him to. And she understood that he had been managing it because he was protecting her. The same way Franklin had protected everything, quietly, without announcement, from a position of deep and patient care. "Day after tomorrow," she said. The morning they rode up the mountain, the sky was the pale gray of early spring, and the air had that particular cold quality that comes before the season commits to warming. Emma rode Shadow. Samuel rode a steady older gelding he had brought from his own property. 3 of the mares followed on a loose lead, reading Shadow's movements and matching them. The trailhead was almost invisible. Emma had walked out to find it twice in the past 2 weeks, using the map, and it had taken her an hour both times to locate the entry point, a narrow gap between 2 rock outcroppings that was barely wide enough for a horse, overgrown with young brush that had taken advantage of decades of neglect. But once they were through it, the trail itself was still there. Faint, yes. Interrupted in places by fallen timber and washout. But Shadow found it the way he found everything. Not by searching, but by knowing. He picked up the line of the old path the way a dog picks up a scent, with a certainty that was almost uncanny, moving forward with his head slightly lower than usual, reading the ground with an attention that Emma could feel through her legs. "There it is," Samuel said quietly behind her. "He's found the track." They climbed for 2 hours. Emma did not think about Briggs. She did not think about the legal notice or the investors or the water rights. She thought about her grandfather walking this trail, younger, probably, in better health, maybe on a horse very like Shadow, and what it had meant to him to find what was at the top of it. She thought about the journal entry. The old path still remembers what men have forgotten. She thought it was true in a way that went beyond the literal. The land did remember. Shadow remembered, or something in his bloodline did. Some inherited knowledge of terrain that expressed itself as confidence on ground that should have been unfamiliar. The aquifer survey point was marked the way her grandfather had marked it on the map. A flat stone with a small cairn of 3 rocks placed on top, clearly deliberate, clearly placed by human hands. Shadow stopped in front of it without being asked. Emma dismounted. The ground around the stone was damp in a way that the surrounding terrain was not. Not wet, not visibly saturated, but different. The kind of damp that speaks to what is moving beneath the surface. Emma put her hand flat on the earth next to the stone and felt it. A faint, almost imperceptible vibration, like something very large, breathing very slowly far below. "Samuel," she said. He dismounted and crouched beside her. He put his own hand on the ground. His expression went very still. "Franklin wasn't exaggerating," he said quietly. "No," Emma said. "They took photographs." Emma had brought a GPS unit, and she recorded the coordinates. She took water samples from the damp ground, using the collection kit Hale had told her to bring. She documented the cairn, the stone, the survey markers that her grandfather had installed on 2 nearby trees. Small, weathered brass markers that would have been invisible to anyone who was not looking for them, but that were precisely what Hale needed to establish prior active use of the site. She found the second thing 20 feet from the cairn. It was a steel survey pipe driven into the ground, with a cap that had been sealed with weatherproofing compound and wired shut. Inside the cap, wrapped in oilcloth and sealed inside a plastic bag, was a document. A second hydrological survey. More recent than the one Hale had. dated 16 months ago, 3 months before her grandfather died. Emma read it standing on the mountain with Shadow beside her and the cold wind moving through the trees and Samuel reading over her shoulder. The numbers were not ambiguous. The aquifer beneath this mountain was one of the largest undocumented freshwater sources in the region. The sustainable yield figures were in a range that represented, the document stated it plainly, a resource of significant regional economic importance. Agricultural, municipal, potentially industrial. Her grandfather had known exactly what he had. He had hidden the proof of it on the mountain, inside a sealed pipe, and he had left the map to Emma. He was protecting the evidence, Samuel said. If Briggs had ever gotten access to the property legally, if he'd managed to buy it or force a sale, and searched the house, he wouldn't have found this. Because it wasn't in the house, Emma said. It was up here, Samuel said, where only someone who knew the trail could go, and only someone who had the horses could reach the trail reliably. Emma stood very still, holding the document, feeling something that was too large to name properly. It was not triumph. It was something older and quieter than triumph. The feeling of understanding, finally and completely, a thing that had been arranged for you long before you arrived. Her grandfather had not just left her a ranch. He had left her a case. A perfectly constructed, meticulously protected legal case, with evidence planted in a location that could only be accessed by someone he trusted, on a trail that could only be navigated by horses that only Emma had been willing to buy. Everything was connected. The horses were not incidental to the plan. They were essential to it. She looked at Shadow. He was watching her with his dark, steady eyes. He knew, she said. Not to Samuel, to the horse, or to her grandfather's ghost, or to the mountain. He planned all of this. Samuel straightened up beside her. Franklin Caldwell, he said, and his voice was rough in a way Emma had not heard from him before, was the finest man I knew, and he spent the last years of his life making sure this land survived him. He was quiet for a moment. Don't waste it. Emma folded the document carefully and put it inside her coat. They rode down the mountain. The horses navigated the descent, the way they had navigated the climb. Shadow leading, reading the ground, the mares following his line. Samuel's gelding bringing up the rear with the patience of long experience. Emma rode with one hand on the reins and one pressed flat against her coat, against the document inside it, feeling its presence the way you feel the presence of something irreplaceable. She called Hale from the truck before she had even fully descended the drive. I found the second survey, she said. Silence on the line. Then, he told me he had hidden something. He didn't tell me where. Another pause. Emma, this changes everything. With both surveys, the documented water rights, and evidence of active use, you have a case that would cost Briggs and his investors several $1 million to challenge, and they would almost certainly lose. His voice shifted slightly, the careful attorney giving way for just a moment to something more personal. Your grandfather built you something extraordinary. I know, Emma said. Bring me everything, Hale said. Tomorrow, if you can. Tomorrow, Emma confirmed. She was halfway back to the barn when she saw the truck. It was parked on the road just outside her gate. A large, dark truck she did not recognize, with 2 men standing beside it. Not threatening, not overtly. Just standing there, watching her drive in. One of them had a camera with a long lens. Emma drove past them without slowing. She pulled up to the barn and got off and handed Shadow's reins to Samuel, who had come up beside her with the particular stillness of someone who had also seen the truck and was waiting to hear what she wanted to do. They're photographing the property, Emma said. Probably been doing it for a while, Samuel said. Looking for signs of activity near the north section. Emma looked toward the north, toward the mountain she had just come down, toward the trail that was invisible from the road and always had been. They don't know what we found, she said. Not yet, Samuel said. Then we have a window, Emma said. Between now and when Hale's response lands on their attorney's desk, they won't know how much we have. She turned to Samuel. I need you to stay on the property tonight. I don't like those men outside the gate. Samuel nodded once. He did not argue. He did not say anything about being 70 years old, or about whether Emma was overreacting. He simply went to his truck and came back with a bag, which meant he had been anticipating this possibility and had already packed. That told Emma something important about how serious Samuel considered the situation to be. She went inside. She made coffee. She sat at the kitchen table with the original map and the letter from her grandfather and the new survey document. And she went through everything once more from the beginning. Her grandfather had spent 40 years protecting this land. He had filed the right documents in the right places. He had commissioned surveys that proved what the land contained. He had trained the horses, or their ancestors, and understood their value on difficult terrain. He had drawn the map and hidden the evidence on the mountain and written the journals and left the letter and contacted Hale and written to Samuel. And he had done all of it, every carefully constructed piece of it, so that one specific person, a 26-year-old woman who had spent her life in Denver not knowing any of this existed, would have everything she needed to fight. The thing that struck Emma, sitting in that kitchen at 10 o'clock at night with the lamplight and the cold and the weight of it all, was not fear. It was something closer to gratitude, and something even closer to responsibility. She thought about the 15 black horses standing in the corral outside. The horses that the entire county had dismissed and mocked and considered worthless. The horses that had turned out to be the key to everything. The trail, the evidence, the timing, the entire plan her grandfather had constructed across years of quiet, certain, patient work. People had laughed at her for buying them, the same way people had underestimated everything in this story. The land, the trail, the old man, and the young woman who had driven 14 hours through a Montana winter to inherit something she did not yet understand. Outside, she heard Shadow move in the corral. That single, deliberate sound of a horse who had decided to keep watch. She put her hand on the kitchen window and looked out at the dark. "I've got it," she said quietly. "I understand now." And Walter Briggs, who had been so patient for so long, was about to discover that he had waited too long. Hale filed the formal water rights assertion on a Tuesday morning, and by Thursday afternoon, Walter Briggs knew about it. Emma knew he knew because of the phone call. She was in the barn doing the midday feed when her cell phone rang, a number she did not recognize, but with a local area code. She answered it. "Miss Caldwell." Briggs's voice was exactly as she remembered it, measured, certain, wearing its authority lightly, like something he barely noticed. "I think it's time we had a real conversation." "We've had several," Emma said. She kept her voice level. She kept moving through the feed routine because stopping would signal that the call had shaken her, and she was not going to give him that. "What's different about this one?" "What's different," Briggs said, "is that you've retained counsel and filed documents that affect the interests of a number of people beyond just yourself and me. I'd like the chance to discuss this face-to-face before it becomes something neither of us can control." "I'm not interested in controlling it," Emma said. "I'm interested in protecting what belongs to my family." A brief silence. When Briggs spoke again, the pleasantness was still there, but it had developed an edge, the way a polished surface develops a scratch, small but impossible not to notice. "Emma. May I call you Emma?" "Miss Caldwell is fine." Another silence. "Miss Caldwell, you are a young woman who drove out here from Denver with no experience, almost no resources, and a sentimentalized view of your grandfather's property. I have been patient with you. I have extended you every courtesy. What you have done with Hale is a provocation, and I am telling you directly that the people I represent do not respond well to provocation." Emma stopped moving. She stood in the middle of the barn and held the phone very still against her ear and felt something cold and clear move through her. Not fear, but its useful cousin, focus. "Are you threatening me?" she said. "I am giving you information," Briggs said. "What you do with it is your business." "Then here is some information for you," Emma said. "I have 2 hydrological surveys, recorded water rights in 3 jurisdictions, documented evidence of continuous use, and an attorney who has been preparing this case for 4 years at my grandfather's instruction. Whatever you thought you were walking into when Franklin died, you were wrong about it, and whoever is behind you needs to understand that." The silence that followed was longer than the others. When Briggs spoke again, the pleasantness was gone entirely. What was underneath it was not anger. It was something cooler and more deliberate than anger. "You should think carefully," he said, "about what you're starting." "I didn't start it," Emma said. "You did. 3 years ago, when you sent attorneys to Billings to try to transfer water rights that were never yours." She paused. "Good afternoon, Mr. Briggs." She ended the call. She stood in the barn for a full minute without moving. Then she walked out to the corral fence and put her arms on the top rail and breathed slowly until the adrenaline moved through and out and left something steadier behind. Shadow came to the fence. He pressed his head against her arm. Not hard, just present. Just there. "I know," Emma said. "I know." She called Hale immediately. "He called you directly?" Hale said. The tone in his voice told Emma this was significant. "Yes, he mentioned the people he represents. Said they don't respond well to provocation." "He's rattled," Hale said. "Men like Briggs don't make personal calls when they're confident. They let attorneys handle it. He called you himself because the filing caught him off guard, and he wanted to assess how much you actually know." A pause. "What did you tell him?" Emma told him. Hale was quiet for a moment. Then he said, with what was for him an unusual warmth, "Good. That was exactly right. You've told them you're armed and that you know it. Now they have to decide whether to escalate or negotiate, and either way, we're in a stronger position than we were this morning." "What's the most likely next move?" Emma asked. "Escalation," Hale said. "They'll file a counterclaim on the easement. They may try to bring in a state-level agency on some pretext. Environmental review, access dispute, something that sounds legitimate but is designed to create delay and cost." He paused. "Emma, I want you to be prepared for this to get harder before it gets better. These are not small interests. They have resources." "So do I," Emma said. A brief pause. "Yes," Hale said. "You do. They just don't look like what they're used to seeing." She understood what he meant. Her resources were 15 black horses and a 70-year-old trainer and a map drawn in fading ink, and 2 surveys sealed in oilcloth on a mountain that only she knew how to reach. Her resources were her grandfather's 40 years of quiet, careful, deliberate preparation. Her resources were not money or political connection, or the kind of institutional weight that Briggs and his investors were accustomed to wielding. But they were real, and they were documented, and they were hers. The counterclaim arrived 8 days later, delivered by courier to her gate. Not to the post office box this time, directly to the property, which told Emma that someone had been watching and knew she was home. It was 43 pages of dense legal language asserting a historical access easement across the north section of the property, with attachments that included what appeared to be records supporting the claim. Emma drove them to Billings. Hale went through them at his desk with the focused attention of a man who had been doing this for a long time and was very good at it. He read without speaking. Emma sat across from him and drank the coffee his assistant had brought and watched his face and tried to read it. He looked up after 20 minutes. "These records are fabricated," he said. Emma went still. "Are you certain?" "The document references a county survey from 1958 that I happen to know does not contain the language they're citing, because your grandfather referenced the same survey in the original water rights filing, and I pulled it at that time." He set the pages down. "They have created a false historical record and attached it to a legal filing. That is not a gray area, Emma. That is fraud." The word landed in the room with a particular weight. "What do we do?" Emma asked. "We document the fraud carefully and completely," Hale said. "And then we have a choice. We can use it defensively, expose it in our response to undermine their credibility with the court, or we can hold it and use it offensively at the moment of maximum impact." He looked at her. "This is your call. It's your case." Emma thought about it. She thought about Briggs's voice on the phone, that cool, deliberate certainty. She thought about the men with cameras outside her gate. She thought about the letter her grandfather had written. "Do not let them tell you otherwise." "We hold it," she said. "We respond to the easement claim on its merits. We let them think we haven't noticed the fabrication, and we use it when it will do the most damage. Hale looked at her steadily. That is exactly what your grandfather would have done, he said. Emma drove home in the dark. She was 30 miles from the ranch when she saw the glow. At first she thought it was a house light, some property between Hartley and the Caldwell land, someone with their porch light on against the dark. But the color was wrong. Too orange, too unsteady. She pressed the accelerator. She came over the last rise and saw the barn. The south corner of the barn roof was on fire. Emma had the truck stopped and the door opened before the vehicle had fully stopped moving. She ran. She was calling 911 with one hand and pulling the barn door open with the other, and the first thing she heard was the horses. Not the barn horses. The barn was empty at night, but the corral horses, the 15 of them, screaming and throwing themselves against the fence in blind panic at the smell of smoke. The fire was in the roof structure, not yet on the ground. She could see the line of it spreading along the old dry timber of the south eave. She grabbed the hose from the outside spigot and aimed it upward, and it was like throwing water at a bonfire with a teacup. But she kept doing it because doing something was better than doing nothing. And the fire department was 23 minutes away, and she knew it. Samuel arrived in 11 minutes. She did not know then, and never fully found out how he had known to come. Later he said only that he had a habit of driving past the Caldwell gate on his way home from wherever he had been, and that the glow in the sky had told him everything. He brought a longer hose from his truck. He worked the south wall while Emma worked the roof. They did not talk. There was nothing to say that was not already being said by the fact that they were both there, both working, both refusing to let it go. The fire department arrived and took over. By then they had slowed the spread enough that it was containable. The south corner of the barn roof was gone. The structure itself was damaged, but standing. No animals had been hurt. The fire chief, a heavy-set man named Garrett with ash on his hands and a careful expression, walked Emma through what they had found. "Miss Caldwell," he said, "I have to ask you something directly. Do you have any reason to believe this fire was set intentionally?" Emma looked at what remained of the south corner. She looked at the 2 points of origin that Garrett had quietly pointed out to her. 2 distinct starting points, not one, which was almost impossible in an accidental fire. "Yes," she said. Garrett nodded slowly. He wrote something in his notebook. "Then we treat this as arson," he said. "I'll need you to contact the sheriff's office tonight." Emma contacted the sheriff's office that night. The deputy who came out was professional and thorough and made no promises. He took photographs and statements and told her they would investigate. His face told her that investigation in Red Willow County on a matter involving Walter Briggs's interests was a complicated thing, and he was not entirely sure which direction it would go. She called Hale at 11:30 at night. Hale answered immediately. She told him about the fire. There was a silence that was different from his usual calculated pauses. This one was the silence of a man who had heard something that genuinely alarmed him. "Emma," he said, "are you safe right now?" "Samuel is here," she said. "He stayed." "Good. Don't be alone on that property." A pause. "This changes things. This is no longer a water rights dispute. If this fire is connected to Briggs and his people, and I believe it is, then we are dealing with criminal conduct, not just civil fraud. That opens different avenues." "What avenues?" Emma asked. "Federal," Hale said simply. "Water rights disputes that cross state lines, combined with documented fraud and potential arson connected to the same parties. That is a pattern of conduct that federal agencies are interested in. I have a contact at the EPA field office and another at the FBI field office in Billings. I have been hesitant to bring them in because federal involvement is slow and complicated, but arson changes the calculation." "Make the calls," Emma said. "Tomorrow morning," Hale said. "First thing. Tonight, stay inside, keep Samuel with you, and call me immediately if anything else happens." Nothing happened that night, but in the morning, Emma woke to find that someone had cut the wire on the north fence line, the section closest to the trail. Not all of it. Just enough to create a gap that a person could walk through. Not enough to be immediately obvious. Just enough to constitute access. They were trying to establish physical presence on the land. She photographed the cut wire. She called Hale. She repaired the fence herself, while Samuel watched the north field and the tree line beyond it, with the focused attention of a man who had been in difficult situations before and understood that knowing where a threat was coming from mattered more than appearing unconcerned. "They're escalating," Samuel said, when Emma came back from the fence repair. "I know," she said. "Why?" he asked. Not a rhetorical question, a real one. They had time. They had patience. What changed? Emma thought about it. "The second survey," she said slowly. "They knew about the first one, my grandfather's original filing. But the second one, the sealed one on the mountain, they didn't know about that. When Hale filed the water rights assertion, they may have realized we had evidence they didn't know existed. Evidence that proves the aquifer is significantly larger than anyone outside this family knew." Samuel looked at her. "So they panicked." "Powerful people do," Emma said, "when they realize the thing they thought was simple is actually not." What happened next was not what Emma expected. She had expected another legal filing, another pressure move from Briggs or his attorneys. What arrived instead, on a Thursday afternoon, was a pickup truck she did not recognize pulling up to the gate, and a man she did not recognize getting out of it. Howe was about 40, lean, with the kind of tan that came from working outdoors in all weather, and not from vacations. He wore a hat that had been worn long enough to mold to his head, and he stood at her gate with an expression that was uncomfortable in the specific way of a person who has decided to do something difficult and is already past the point of turning back. Emma walked to the gate. "Miss Caldwell?" he said. "Yes. My name is Davis Crane. I've worked for Walter Briggs for 11 years. He met her eyes and held them. "I need to talk to you. And I need you to understand that coming here is the hardest thing I've done in a long time." Emma studied him for a moment. His hands were at his sides. His truck had a dent in the passenger door and mud on the tires. He was not performing anything. He was simply standing there, carrying something heavy, having decided to put it down. She opened the gate. "Come inside," she said. Samuel was in the kitchen when Emma brought Davis Crane in. Samuel looked at the man the way he looked at everything, taking in information slowly and without expression, coming to conclusions he kept to himself until he needed to share them. Emma poured coffee. She sat down across from Crane. She did not say anything. She waited. Crane wrapped both hands around the coffee mug and looked at the table for a moment. Then he said, "The fire was not ordered by Briggs directly, but it was done by men who work for people connected to the investment group behind him, and he knew about it before it happened, and he did not stop it." Emma did not move. "I found out afterward," Crane said. "I confronted the man who organized it, not Briggs, a man named Kellner, who works for the investment group directly. Kellner told me it was a warning, that it was supposed to scare you off without doing serious damage." He looked up at Emma. "I've done a lot of things for Briggs over 11 years. I am not a perfect man, but I did not sign on for arson." "Why are you here?" Emma asked. "Why not go to the sheriff?" Crane's expression shifted. "The sheriff in this county and Walter Briggs have known each other for 22 years, he said. "If I walk into that office with what I know, it dies there." Samuel spoke for the first time. "So you came to her?" "So I came to her," Crane said. He looked at Emma. "Because she's the one who hasn't backed down. Because from what I've seen, she's the only person in this county who actually has a chance of making any of this matter." He reached into his coat and put a folder on the table. "These are internal communications from the investment group. Emails, mostly. They were sent to Briggs and I was CC'd because I coordinate logistics for him. There are references to the water rights, to the easement claim, and," he stopped, "to the decision regarding the warning." Emma looked at the folder. She did not touch it. "If I use these," she said, "what happens to you?" "Briggs fires me," Crane said. "Probably worse, depending on what Kellner decides to do about it." He was quiet for a moment. "I've got a daughter in Missoula. I'm telling you that not for sympathy, but because I want you to understand that I know exactly what I'm risking, and I decided to come here anyway." Emma put her hand on the folder. She thought about 15 black horses at an auction and $50, and a town full of people who had already decided how her story ended. She thought about her grandfather writing in his journals at night in this kitchen, 40 years of careful, patient documentation, protecting something he knew was worth protecting, even when nobody else could see why. She thought about what it cost to decide, against all practical self-interest, that some things mattered more than safety. She picked up the folder. "Samuel," she said, "can you give us a few minutes?" Samuel got up without a word and went outside. Through the window, Emma could see him walk directly to the corral fence where Shadow was standing, and she thought, not for the first time, that Samuel Boone communicated better with horses than with people, and that this was not actually a limitation. Emma opened the folder. She spent 40 minutes reading it with Davis Crane across the table from her, answering her questions where she had them, providing context for communications she did not fully understand. When she finished, she closed the folder and sat for a moment. "I need to call my attorney," she said, "tonight, and I need you to be willing to give a formal statement." "That's why I came," Crane said. "It's going to be complicated," Emma said. "It's going to take time and it's going to cost you things." "I know," Crane said. She looked at him for a moment. "Why did you really come?" she asked. Not challenging him, genuinely asking. He looked at his coffee. "I worked for Briggs for 11 years, he said. "I watched him do a lot of things I didn't fully agree with but convinced myself were just business. The fire was different." He was quiet for a moment. "My daughter is 7. I keep thinking about what I'm going to tell her someday about the choices I made." He looked up. "That probably sounds—" "No," Emma said. "It doesn't." She called Hale that evening with Crane still at the kitchen table. Hale's response to the folder contents was the most energized she had ever heard him. The careful attorney's composure thinning at the edges to reveal someone who had been waiting a long time for exactly this kind of evidence. "The email referencing the decision regarding the warning," Hale said. "Is it explicit?" "Explicit enough," Emma said. "Crane can provide context that makes it unambiguous." "Then this is the piece," Hale said. "This combined with the fraudulent easement documents gives us civil fraud and criminal conspiracy in the same package. This is what I call my federal contact tonight, not tomorrow morning." A pause. "Emma, I need you to understand. From this point forward, events are going to move faster than you are used to. Things are going to happen that may feel out of your control. That's normal. That's what it looks like when a large legal machine starts moving." "I understand," Emma said. "Do you?" Hale said, not unkindly. "Because the next few weeks are going to be hard in ways that the past few months have not been. Briggs is going to know Crane came to you. He's going to know the folder is in your possession. He is going to respond." "Let him," Emma said. She heard Hale breathe. "Your grandfather said something to me once," he said. "He said the only people he worried about were the ones who didn't know what they were willing to lose. He said the ones who did know, the ones who had looked at it clearly and decided it was worth it anyway. Those people were impossible to move." He paused. "I believe I'm talking to that kind of person." Emma did not answer that. She thanked him and ended the call. She arranged for Crane to stay at Samuel's property that night. It was not safe for him to go home, and it was not safe to have him at the ranch where Briggs's people clearly had eyes. Samuel, who had come back in from the corral while Emma was on the phone with Hale, simply looked at Crane and said, "You can have the spare room," with the no-ceremony practicality of a man who had made more difficult decisions than this, with considerably less information. Crane nodded. "Thank you." "Don't thank me," Samuel said. "Thank her. I'm just the one with the spare room." Emma walked them out. She stood at the gate and watched Samuel's truck until the taillights disappeared, and then she turned back to the house and stopped. Thomas Whitaker's truck was parked at the far end of the drive. She had not heard him arrive. She did not know how long he had been there. He was standing beside the truck with his hat in his hands, a man in his late 50s, broad-shouldered, with the kind of face that had spent decades outdoors. She had not heard him arrive. She did not know how long he had been there. He was standing beside the truck with his hat in his hands, a man in his late 50s, broad-shouldered, with the kind of face that had spent decades outdoors and made peace with it. He had been the one the county's old-timers called when they wanted a second opinion on something they could not fully trust themselves to evaluate. She had met him twice, briefly, at the feed store. He had been polite both times in the way of someone who was watching and had not yet decided. "Miss Caldwell," he said, "I'm sorry to come by without calling. I wasn't sure you'd answer." "What do you need, Mr. Whitaker?" Emma said. She was tired. She was trying not to show it. "I saw the barn," Whitaker said. He looked at what remained of the south corner. He was quiet for a moment. "I've been watching what you've been doing out here since February. I heard about the horses at the auction. I heard what people said." He turned his hat in his hands. "I've been in this county my whole life. I've watched Briggs operate for 20 years. I know what he does when someone gets in his way." He met her eyes. "I want to help." Emma studied him. "Why?" she asked. Direct. No softening. Whitaker did not flinch from the directness. "Because I watched my father lose his land to men like Briggs when I was 19 years old," he said. "And I was too young and too scared to do anything about it. I've carried that for 40 years. He stopped turning the hat. "I'm not too young anymore, and I'm not scared of Walter Briggs." Emma held his gaze for a long moment. "What kind of help?" she said. "I know every rancher in this county," Whitaker said. "I know which ones Briggs has bullied and which ones he's bought. I know which ones are waiting for someone to show them it's possible to push back." He paused. "What you're doing, the legal case, the water rights, it doesn't just affect you. The aquifer under that mountain feeds water sources that half this valley depends on. People need to understand what Briggs and his investors actually intend to do with that water if they acquire control of it." Emma had not told anyone outside of Hale about the full scope of what the second survey revealed. She looked at Whitaker carefully. "You know about the aquifer." "I know enough," he said. "I know that a development company based in Denver filed a preliminary prospectus 18 months ago for a large-scale water extraction and resale operation in this region. I know that prospectus identified this county as the primary target area. I know that if that operation moves forward, the downstream agricultural water rights that 23 ranch operations depend on could be substantially compromised." The silence between them was very full. "How do you know that?" Emma said quietly. "Because my son-in-law works for the State Water Board," Whitaker said, "and he has been worried about this situation for 2 years. He can't act officially without more evidence. But unofficially—" He stopped. "He sent me here, Emma. That's the truth of it. He sent me here because he read about the water rights filing in the county records, and he recognized the Caldwell name, and he told me to get out here and find out if you knew what you were sitting on." Emma stood very still. She thought about her grandfather's letter. "When I am gone, someone will have to keep protecting it. I hope they are strong enough." She thought he had meant her. Only her. But Franklin Caldwell had spent 40 years on this land. He had known every person in this county, had watched every alliance form and every betrayal happen, had understood the landscape of power here the way he understood the mountain trails, completely, specifically, without illusion. He had protected the water. He had protected the evidence. He had protected the legal record. And he had known, because he was the kind of man who understood how the world actually worked, that one person, even a person as determined as Emma, could not do this alone. He had left her the horses and the map and the journals and the lawyer. He had left Crane with his conscience and 11 years of documentation. He had left Samuel with 30 years of loyalty and a spare room and hands that never shook. He had left Whitaker with his son-in-law at the State Water Board, and 40 years of wanting to do the thing he had not been brave enough to do at 19. Franklin Caldwell had not built Emma a fortress. He had built her an army. She just had not seen it assembled until now. Emma stepped back from the gate. "Come inside," she said to Whitaker. "There's coffee, and I need to make some phone calls." Whitaker put his hat back on. He followed her inside. He sat at the kitchen table where Crane had sat 2 hours earlier, and where Samuel had sat every evening for months, and he looked at the journals and the documents and the map spread across it, and he did not say anything for a moment. Then he said, "Franklin always said the land remembered." "He did," Emma said. He was right, Whitaker said. He looked at her. So do people. She called Hale again at 9 o'clock with Whitaker at the table and told him about the state water board connection. Hale was quiet for a long time, the productive silence of a man whose thinking had just reorganized significantly around new information. This is the piece I didn't have, he said finally. A state agency with an independent interest in the outcome. That changes the federal angle considerably. Another pause. Emma, this case is no longer just about your water rights. This is about a coordinated attempt to capture a regional water resource for private commercial extraction, using fraud and criminal intimidation to remove the legitimate rights holder. That is a federal matter and a state matter simultaneously. His voice was very calm. The voice of a man looking at a chessboard and seeing something he has been looking for. They made a mistake. They moved too fast when they panicked. They tipped their hand. What do we do next? Emma asked. We let them make one more move, Hale said. They will. They're committed now and they can't stop. When they do, we respond with everything. The fraud evidence, Crane's statement, the second survey, the water board connection, all of it at once. In court, in the press, and at the federal level simultaneously. A pause. Can you hold for another week? Maybe 2? Emma thought about the horses in the corral. Shadow at the fence. Samuel's steadiness. Whitaker sitting across from her with 40 years of regret converted into something useful. Crane in a spare room at Samuel's property, having put his safety on the line because his daughter was 7 and he had decided what kind of choices he was going to be able to explain to her. Yes, Emma said. We can hold. She ended the call. She looked at Whitaker. How many ranchers? She said. Realistically, how many would stand behind this publicly if it came to that? Whitaker thought about it seriously. He did not give her a number immediately, which she appreciated. He was counting in his head, weighing people, being honest with himself about who would and who wouldn't. 15, he said finally. Maybe 18, if we give them enough time. People who have their own water concerns. People who've dealt with Briggs directly and come out worse for it. People who are tired of feeling like there's nothing they can do. Emma thought about the auction yard. 15 black horses, 15 ranchers. The number was not lost on her. Get them ready, she said. Don't tell them specifics yet. Just get them ready. Whitaker nodded. He stood. He put his hand out and Emma shook it. A plain, solid handshake, the kind that means something. Your grandfather would be proud, he said. Emma did not answer that. Not because it did not matter. Because it mattered more than she could say in that moment, without losing her composure, and she needed her composure for what was coming. She walked Whitaker to his truck. She stood in the drive after he left and looked up at the mountain, invisible in the dark, carrying its secret water and its sealed survey and its old trail that the horses remembered. She thought about what her grandfather had written. The value of land is not what you can take from it. It is what you protect for those who come after you. She had understood that as an abstraction when she first read it. She understood it now as something else, a specific, living, urgent truth that applied to everything she was doing and everyone who had come to stand beside her, and every horse that had been dismissed as worthless, and every person who had decided, against practical wisdom and personal safety, that some things mattered enough to fight for. Walter Briggs and his investors had money and influence and a well-funded legal operation and years of practice applying pressure to people until they gave way. Emma had something he did not. She had people who chose to be here. And in her experience, in the experience she was still accumulating, day by day, in this place that her grandfather had left her, that was the thing that held when everything else gave. She went inside. She went to bed. She lay in the dark on the iron bed her grandfather had built by hand, and she did not lie awake worrying. She slept. Outside, Shadow paced the fence line in the dark, steady and deliberate, keeping watch over a piece of land that was worth fighting for. Briggs made his move on a Monday. Emma had been expecting it. Hale had told her to expect it. But knowing something is coming and feeling it. Arrive are two different things. And when Samuel called her at 7 in the morning, with his voice carrying that particular flatness that meant he was controlling something, she felt it land in her chest like a stone dropped into still water. "There's a sheriff's deputy at your gate," Samuel said. "And 2 men I don't recognize. One of them has a document." Emma was already dressed. She had been up since 5. She pulled on her coat and walked out. The deputy was a young man she had not seen before. Not the careful, complicated one who had come about the arson, but someone newer, someone who stood with the particular stiffness of a person executing an order they were not entirely comfortable with and was trying to look official enough that nobody would ask questions. The 2 men beside him were in clean coats and carried briefcases and had the look of attorneys who had driven up from somewhere with better coffee than Hartley. The document was a temporary restraining order. Emma read it standing at her own gate in the cold morning air, while the deputy watched her, and Samuel watched the deputy in shadow, visible through the corral fence 50 yards away, watched all of them. The TRO asserted that Emma's water rights filing constituted an unlawful interference with a pre-existing access agreement, and it ordered her to cease and desist from any activity related to the north section of the property, pending a court hearing scheduled for 3 weeks from that date. She read it twice. Then she looked up at the deputy. "I'll need a copy," she said. "Yes, ma'am," he said. He handed her one. He looked like he wanted to say something else. He did not. The attorneys left without speaking to her directly. The deputy tipped his hat, a small, uncomfortable gesture, and followed them. Emma stood at the gate with the document in her hand. Samuel came up beside her. He read it over her shoulder in silence. When he finished, he said, "They went to a judge." "They went to a judge who knows Briggs," Emma said, "or owes him something." She folded the document. "Call Whitaker. Tell him it's time." Samuel looked at her. "You're sure?" "They just handed me a court date," Emma said. "That's the most useful thing they could have done." She called Hale before she reached the house. Hale had already heard. His contact at the county courthouse had called him 20 minutes earlier, which told Emma that Hale had prepared for this specific scenario and had people watching for it, which told her that her grandfather had chosen his attorney with the same deliberate care he had applied to everything else. "The judge is Harold Fenwick," Hale said. "He and Briggs are not friends, but they have done business together in the past. He is not corrupt in the obvious sense. He is simply a man who moves carefully when powerful interests are involved." A pause. "This works in our favor. Fenwick will not throw the case. He will follow the law. And the law, Emma, is entirely on our side." 3 weeks, Emma said. 3 weeks, Hale confirmed. "In that time, I am going to file our full response, which includes the fraud documentation, Crane's sworn statement, and the second hydrological survey. I am also going to submit a formal notification to the federal EPA field office and copy the state water board. By the time we walk into that courtroom, the record will be so thoroughly established that ruling against us would require Fenwick to ignore documented evidence of criminal fraud." "Will he?" Emma asked. "No," Hale said. "Fenwick is careful, but he is not reckless. There is a difference between a judge who moves slowly when powerful interests are present and a judge who commits career suicide to protect those interests." He paused. "I have practiced law in this state for 31 years. I know Harold Fenwick. He will follow the evidence." Emma trusted Hale's judgment. She had trusted it since the moment she understood what her grandfather had seen in him. But trust and certainty were different things. And in the 3 weeks between that morning and the court date, she held both of them, trust and the absence of certainty, and learned to work with both. Whitaker moved in those 3 weeks. He moved with the quiet efficiency of a man who had been waiting 40 years for a specific kind of moment and had thought carefully about what he would do when it arrived. He drove to every ranch on his list. He sat at kitchen tables and drank coffee and laid out the facts plainly. The aquifer, the development prospectus, the fraud, the arson. And he let people decide for themselves what it meant and whether they wanted to stand behind it. 14 of them said yes. The 15th was a man named Carver, who had borrowed money from Briggs 2 years ago and was still paying it back and could not afford the exposure. He said no, with the defeated expression of a man who knows he is making the wrong choice and cannot see a way around it. Whitaker told him he understood and left without pressure. That was the right thing to do, and Emma told Whitaker so when he reported back. 14 is enough, she said. 14 ranchers publicly supporting your water rights claim, Whitaker said. 14 statements of downstream dependency on the aquifer. 14 people willing to testify that Briggs has used pressure tactics against them personally. He paused. And my son-in-law at the State Water Board has filed a formal inquiry into the development prospectus. That was filed this morning. Emma absorbed this. Briggs knows all of this is coming? He knows some of it, Whitaker said. He doesn't know about the State Water Board inquiry yet. He doesn't know about Crane's formal statement, because Hale filed it under seal pending the hearing. He looked at her steadily. He thinks he's walking into a court hearing against a 26-year-old woman with a water rights claim and a local attorney. He does not know what he is actually walking into. Emma thought about the auction yard. The way Briggs had stepped forward and looked at her over the heads of the crowd with that patient, calculating certainty. The way he had said, in a voice designed for public consumption, 20 years from now, people will still remember the day Emma Caldwell wasted her grandfather's land on 15 broken horses. Good, she said. She spent those 3 weeks working. She worked the horses every morning with Samuel, because the routine of it kept her grounded, and because the horses still needed her, regardless of what was happening in courtrooms and county offices and attorneys' offices in Billings. She repaired the south corner of the barn with lumber she bought on credit from the hardware store in Hartley. The same hardware store where she had overheard the woman say that Briggs expected her to be gone by spring. The woman was behind the counter when Emma came in. She did not say anything about what Emma had overheard months ago. She just rang up the lumber and said, "Need help loading it?" And Emma said, "I've got it, thank you." And that was that. The day before the hearing, Thomas Whitaker brought someone to the ranch that Emma had not expected. She was in the corral with Shadow when Whitaker's truck came through the gate, and she saw immediately that there was someone in the passenger's seat she did not recognize. A woman, older, with white hair and a straight back, and the expression of someone who had decided something important and was moving toward it without hesitation. The woman got out of the truck and looked at the horses and then at Emma, and her expression shifted into something complicated that Emma could not immediately read. "Emma Caldwell," Whitaker said. "This is Margaret Hooper." Emma went very still. Hooper, the name on the auction paperwork, the previous owner of the 15 black horses. Margaret Hooper was perhaps 70, small and precise, with hands that had worked hard for decades and eyes that were sharper than her age might have suggested. She looked at Shadow and the other horses in the corral with an expression that Emma now recognized as grief. Not fresh grief, but the old kind, the settled-in kind that a person has learned to carry without letting it slow them down. "Mrs. Hooper," Emma said carefully. "I didn't know. My husband owned those horses," Margaret Hooper said. "He died 4 years ago. I couldn't manage them alone, and I couldn't afford to keep them properly, and I—" She stopped. She looked at Shadow again. "I sold them to a man named Kelsey, who I believed when he said he would find them good homes. He did not." She met Emma's eyes. "I heard what you did at that auction. I heard what people said about you." She paused. "I want to testify." Emma blinked. "Testify to what?" "To why my husband had those horses in the first place," Margaret said. "To what Walter Briggs did to us." She looked at Whitaker, then back at Emma. "My husband worked a property that bordered Briggs's land on the north side. 15 years ago, Briggs wanted an easement across our north field. My husband refused. Within 2 years, we had zoning challenges, water access disputes, a lawsuit over a fence line that had been in the same place for 40 years. She was quiet for a moment. "We survived it, but it cost us. It cost us the north property. We sold it to pay the legal bills." She looked at the horses. "He bought those horses the year after we lost the north land. He said they were the only thing Briggs couldn't put a price on." Emma stood in the corral with Shadow beside her and felt the weight of what Margaret Hooper was telling her. Not just her own story, but the pattern of it. Briggs had been doing this for 15 years. The fraud on the Caldwell water rights was not the first time. It was just the most recent and the most ambitious. "Come inside," Emma said. "I want you to talk to my attorney." She called Hale right there, with Margaret Hooper sitting at the kitchen table, and Whitaker standing by the window, and Samuel, who had come in from the barn, leaning against the doorframe with the coffee he had poured and not yet drunk. Hale listened to a 10-minute summary of what Margaret Hooper was prepared to testify to, and when Emma finished, there was a silence on the line that was different from any of his previous silences. It was the silence of a man looking at a completed picture. "Pattern of conduct," he said, "documented over 15 years, with a previous victim who is willing to testify." He paused. "Emma, this is not a water rights case anymore. This is a racketeering case. This is a federal matter in the most complete sense of the word." Another pause. "I need to make 2 calls tonight. You will hear from me before 9 o'clock. He called back at 8:47. His federal contact at the FBI field office in Billings had agreed to have 2 agents present in the courtroom the following morning, not as participants, but as observers. Their presence on the record would signal to Fenwick that the federal government was aware of the case and watching its outcome. And Hale had spoken to the state attorney general's office, which had been monitoring the development prospectus situation through the Water Board, and was prepared to file its own action the moment the civil case established the underlying facts. "Tomorrow," Hale said, "we walk into that courtroom and we end this." Emma did not sleep much that night. She lay in the dark, and she did not try to force sleep. She thought about her grandfather instead, about what he had known and when he had known it, about the 40 years of patience and preparation that had led to this specific morning. She thought about a man who had understood that he would not live to fight this battle himself, and who had spent the last years of his life making sure that someone he trusted would be able to fight it after him. She thought about the letter. "I believe you are built for exactly this. Do not let them tell you otherwise." At 4:30, she got up. She dressed in the dark. She went out to the corral. Shadow was awake. She did not know if horses truly slept the way people imagined, but in her months on this ranch, she had learned that Shadow operated on his own schedule, and at 4:30 in the morning, he was standing near the gate with the alert stillness of something that had been waiting. Emma put her hand on his neck. She stood with him in the cold and the dark for a long time without saying anything. Then she said, "We're going today." Shadow breathed steadily under her hand. "It's going to be all right," she said. She was not entirely sure whether she was telling him or herself. She decided it did not matter. The courthouse in Hartley was a 2-story brick building that had been standing since 1891, and it smelled inside like every courthouse Emma had ever been in. Old wood and institutional cleaning product and the specific weight of accumulated decisions. She arrived with Hale at 8:15. Whitaker was already in the hallway with 6 of the 14 ranchers, the ones who had agreed to be visibly present in the courtroom, even if they were not called to testify. The others had submitted written statements. Margaret Hooper was there, sitting straight-backed on a bench with her coat folded across her lap, looking like a woman who had waited 15 years for this morning and had decided to wear her good coat for it. Davis Crane was there. He had driven from Samuel's property at 6 in the morning. He looked like a man who had not slept much either, but his jaw was set with the particular firmness of someone who had made an irreversible decision and was at peace with it. Samuel was there. He stood near the door in his good hat and said nothing to anyone, which was entirely characteristic. But when Emma walked past him, he put his hand briefly on her arm and said very quietly, "Franklin would have been here if he could." Emma nodded. She could not speak for a moment. She composed herself and walked into the courtroom. Briggs was already seated at the opposing table with 2 attorneys she had not seen before, not the ones who had served the TRO, different ones, better dressed, with the polished efficiency of a higher-priced firm. He glanced at Emma when she came in, and his expression did not change. He was still performing certainty. She could see the performance in the set of his shoulders, in the way he looked at her without any of the discomfort a person feels when they know they are about to be exposed. He still thought he was winning. Emma sat down beside Hale. Hale leaned close and said very quietly, "The 2 men in the back left corner, gray suits. Those are the FBI observers. Emma did not look. And Fenwick? Is a careful man who follows evidence, Hale said. Trust the preparation. Judge Harold Fenwick entered, and the room stood and the room sat and the hearing began. Briggs's attorneys went first. They presented the easement claim with the confidence of people who had filed many such claims and expected this one to proceed the way the others had. They referenced the historical records, the fabricated ones, the ones that Emma had known about for weeks, and Hale had been quietly waiting to address. They were thorough and professional, and completely unaware of what was about to happen to them. When Hale rose, the courtroom had the particular silence of a room that is paying close attention without knowing exactly why. He began with the water rights. He laid out the documentation systematically. The original 1962 filing, the 1987 supplement, the chain of recorded ownership, the specific language that explicitly predated and superseded any easement claim. He was precise and unhurried, and Fenwick took notes. Then Hale said, "Your Honor, I would like to address the historical record submitted by the opposing party in support of their easement claim." He placed the 1958 county survey on record. The original, the one that did not contain the language Briggs's attorneys had cited. He placed it beside the document Briggs's attorneys had filed. He showed the difference. The courtroom went very quiet. Fenwick looked at both documents for a long time. Then he looked at Briggs's lead attorney over the top of his reading glasses. The attorney's composure had developed a visible crack. Not collapse, not yet, but the specific quality of stillness that a person achieves when they are trying not to react to something that requires a reaction. "Counselor," Fenwick said, to Briggs's attorney, "would you like to address this discrepancy?" The attorney said something careful about document sourcing and the possibility of clerical error. His voice was steady. His hands, when he set down the papers he was holding, were not. Fenwick made a note. "Continue," he said to Hale. Hale continued. He introduced Crane's sworn statement. He summarized it without theater, just the facts, just the dates, just the specific language from the emails referencing the decision regarding the warning. He referenced the fire. He referenced the cut fence. He referenced the pattern. Then he introduced Margaret Hooper's affidavit. Then the 14 rancher statements. Then the State Water Board inquiry. Then the second hydrological survey, with its GPS coordinates and its collection data and its sustainable yield projections that put the aquifer in a category that made the word significant sound almost inadequate. Each piece of evidence arrived in the courtroom like a stone laid carefully on a scale, and Emma watched the scale tip slowly, irreversibly, in the only direction that the evidence permitted. Briggs's lead attorney requested a recess after the second survey was entered into the record. Fenwick granted 15 minutes. During the recess, Emma stood in the hallway with Hale and Whitaker and did not speak. She watched Briggs through the glass panel in the courtroom door. He was leaning close to his attorneys, speaking rapidly. His composure was not entirely gone. He was too practiced for that, but the edges of it had changed. The certainty was gone. What was under it, Emma saw for the first time, was not arrogance exactly. It was something smaller and more familiar. It was the look of a man who had built his entire understanding of a situation on an assumption that had just been proven wrong. He had assumed Emma did not know what she had. He had assumed that because she was young and came from the city and had arrived with almost no money and bought 15 horses everyone thought were worthless, she could not possibly understand the value of what her grandfather had left her. He had made the same mistake that every person at that auction had made. He had judged something before he understood it. Samuel appeared at Emma's elbow during the recess, having come in from the hallway. "How's it going?" he asked. "It's going," Emma said. He nodded. He looked through the glass at Briggs. "Your grandfather used to say that the truth has a weight to it that lies can't match over the long run. Said it was physics, basically. Said you could hold something false up for a while if you were strong enough, but eventually the weight difference would tell." He looked back at Emma. He was right. The hearing resumed. Briggs's attorneys had reconstituted themselves. They argued, professionally, competently, doing what they were paid to do. They challenged the chain of evidence. They questioned the interpretation of the hydrological data. They suggested that the discrepancy in the historical records was a matter of document versioning rather than fraud. They were good at their jobs, and they worked hard with what they had. What they had was not enough. Fenwick listened. He took notes. He asked questions of both sides with the scrupulous even-handedness of a man who understood that people were watching him and intended to be beyond reproach in his method, even as he arrived at the conclusion that the evidence required. When both sides had finished, he looked at his notes for a full 2 minutes. The courtroom was so quiet, Emma could hear the heat coming through the old radiators. Fenwick looked up. "The temporary restraining order is dissolved," he said. "The easement claim is denied. The Caldwell water rights as filed are recognized as valid, prior, and superior to any competing claim presented today." He looked at Briggs's attorneys. "Regarding the documentary discrepancy brought to this court's attention, I am referring that matter to the county attorney's office with a recommendation for investigation. The nature of that discrepancy, as presented in the evidence before this court, exceeds what can be characterized as clerical error." He paused. "This hearing is concluded." The sound in the courtroom was not applause. Courts did not allow applause. But there was a quality of collective exhale. 14 ranchers and 1 horse trainer, and 1 retired rancher's widow, and 1 man who had driven to a gate he was afraid to approach and knocked on it anyway. That was something close to it. Briggs stood and straightened his coat and walked out without looking at Emma. His attorneys followed him. His walk was steady, and his posture was correct, and he did not hurry. But Emma, watching him go, saw the thing she had not expected to see. He looked tired. Not defeated in the dramatic sense, just tired, like a man who had been holding something very heavy for a very long time and had finally put it down, even though putting it down was not his choice. She almost felt something about that. She chose not to. Hale was beside her, gathering documents with brisk efficiency. "The referral to the county attorney is the beginning of a longer process," he said quietly. "The federal action will take time. The state water board inquiry will take time. Today is not the end." "I know," Emma said. "But today matters," he said. He looked at her directly. "Today, Emma, was your grandfather's 40 years of work being recognized by a court of law. That matters." Emma pressed her lips together. She nodded. Davis Crane was in the hallway when she came out. He was standing alone, slightly apart from the group of ranchers who were talking in a low, energized murmur. He looked like a man who had just stepped through a door and was waiting to see what was on the other side. Emma walked to him. "Thank you," she said. Crane shook his head. "You're the one who built the case." "You're the one who knocked on the gate," Emma said. "That took more than you think." He looked at her for a moment. Something in his face eased. "My daughter called me this morning," he said. "Before the hearing. She wanted to know if I was okay." He stopped. "She's 7. She doesn't know what any of this is. She just knew something was happening and she called." He looked at the floor for a moment. "I told her I was fine. I told her I was doing the right thing." "You were," Emma said. Margaret Hooper found Emma in the parking lot. The older woman walked up to her with the directness of someone who had come a long way for this moment and intended to use it properly. "He won't stop," Margaret said. "Men like Briggs, this won't end them." "No," Emma agreed. "But it slows them down, and it changes what other people believe is possible." Margaret studied her for a long moment. "My husband believed those horses were worth something," she said. "He spent 3 years trying to convince people of it. Nobody listened." She looked at Emma steadily. "You listened, in a way, eh?" She paused. "I want you to have something." She opened her coat and took out a folded paper. She held it out. Emma took it and unfolded it. It was a hand-drawn diagram. Old paper, pencil lines, the careful work of someone who paid attention to detail. It showed a horse's physical structure with specific measurements and notation. Bloodline records, training notes, behavioral observations. It was a breeding record for Shadow's bloodline, going back 3 generations. Emma's throat tightened. "My husband kept those records for 20 years, Margaret said. He said that horse's bloodline was the finest mountain horse stock left in Montana. He said it would matter someday to the right person. She closed Emma's hand around the paper. It's yours. Emma held the paper in both hands. She did not trust her voice for a moment. Thank you, she finally said. Margaret Hooper nodded. She turned and walked to Whitaker's truck, and she was precise and straight-backed the whole way. And Emma watched her go with something in her chest that was too large and too complicated to name, and so she simply let it be there. The drive home was quiet. Samuel drove. Emma sat in the passenger seat with the breeding record in her coat pocket and the copy of the court ruling on her lap, and the late afternoon light moving through the windshield in long golden angles. What do you do now? Samuel asked. Emma thought about it. Repair the barn properly, she said. Train the horses. File the response to the federal inquiry so it's ready when they need it. And after that? Same thing, Emma said. Samuel was quiet for a moment. Whitaker said 3 of those ranchers asked about the horses, whether any of them are available for working partnerships. Emma looked out the window. They're not for sale, she said. He said partnership, Samuel said. Not sale. There's a difference. Emma considered this. Partnership. The word had a different weight than sale. Sale was transaction. Partnership was something else. Something more like what her grandfather had built over 40 years. A network of relationships, each one rooted in mutual interest and genuine respect, each one making the whole stronger than the individual parts. Tell them to come out, she said. I want to talk to them myself first. Samuel nodded. He drove. The mountains came into view ahead of them. The north ridge where the trail was, and the aquifer was, and the sealed survey pipe was, and the cairn of 3 stones her grandfather had placed, and the brass markers on the trees that said, in the oldest language of property law, that someone had been here and had claimed this and had protected it. Samuel, Emma said, when you first saw those horses at the auction, or heard about them, did you know? Know what? That they were what he needed them to be, for the plan. Samuel drove for a moment without answering. I suspected, he said finally. I knew the bloodline. I knew what those horses could do on difficult terrain. I knew Franklin had been watching the Hooper stock for years. He paused. But I didn't know for certain until I saw Shadow the first week. The way he watched you. The way he evaluated you. He glanced at her. That horse is his great-grandsire's son in every way that matters. Franklin knew it. He chose those specific animals, and he chose them deliberately. He chose them because he knew I would buy them, Emma said. He chose them, Samuel said carefully, because he knew you would understand them. Buying them was just the first step. Emma let that sit. She looked at the mountains. Her grandfather had understood something that the entire county had missed, that the horses and the land and the trail and the water were not separate things. They were one thing. A system. Each part supporting every other part, the way the aquifer supported the valley, and the trail supported access to the aquifer, and the horses made the trail navigable, and the map made the horse's purpose clear, and the journals made the map legible, and the attorney and the evidence made the journals actionable. Franklin Caldwell had not just left her a ranch, he had left her a complete and functioning truth. They pulled through the gate of the Caldwell property as the last light was going orange over the ridge. Emma got out of the truck and stood for a moment in the drive, and the horses in the corral heard the truck and began moving, the way they always did. Coming to the fence, Shadow first, the others following. 15 black shapes against the fading light. She walked to the corral fence. Shadow came directly to her. He put his head next to her shoulder, not resting it, just placing it close, the way he had done the night of the Briggs phone call, the way he had been doing more and more in the past months. The gesture of a horse who had decided, finally and completely, that the person beside him was worth staying close to. Emma put her hand on his neck. She stood there while the light went, and the stars began, and Samuel moved quietly behind her, doing the evening feed. The sounds of the ranch settling into its nighttime rhythms, the way it had been settling into them for 40 years before she arrived. She thought about the auction yard, the laughter. Walter Briggs's measured voice telling everyone that she was about to make the biggest mistake they had ever seen. She thought about $50 and $43 and a letter written on soft paper and a map folded inside a journal cover and a trail that the horses remembered. She thought about what it had cost. The months of work, the legal battle, the fire, the fear in the middle of the night, the phone calls to Hale, the conversations at kitchen tables, the moment at the gate with Davis Crane, when she had looked at him and understood what it meant to choose the right thing over the safe thing and make that choice at personal cost. She thought about Margaret Hooper's husband, who had kept breeding records for 20 years because he believed something was worth believing in, even when nobody around him agreed. She thought about Samuel, who was 70 years old and came through the gate every morning at 6 o'clock because a dead friend had asked him to, and because it was the right thing, and because some debts are paid not in money but in presence. She thought about her grandfather, writing in his journals at night at this same kitchen table, with the same lamplight and the same cold coming through the same windows, building something that would last beyond him in the only way that things truly last, by putting it into the hands of someone who understood what it was for. The breeding record was still in her coat pocket. She took it out and looked at it in the dim light from the barn. Shadow's great-grandsire, documented across 3 generations in the careful handwriting of a man who had spent 20 years paying attention. All of them. Her grandfather, Samuel, Margaret Hooper's husband, Whitaker's father, who had lost his land at 19. All of them had been paying attention to something that most people walked past without seeing. A bloodline, a water source, a trail, a piece of ground that looked like a burden and turned out to be a foundation. Emma had thought, at the auction, that she was buying horses. She had been buying a language. A way of reading the world that her grandfather had spent a lifetime developing and had passed to her the only way it could be passed. Not through instruction, but through experience. Not through explanation, but through the living of it. She folded the breeding record and put it back in her pocket. "All right," she said softly, to Shadow, to the night, to her grandfather's presence that she still felt in that kitchen and on that land. On certain evenings when the light was right and the horses were close. All right. 3 weeks later, the county attorney's office opened a formal investigation into the fraudulent document filing. 2 weeks after that, the FBI field office in Billings opened its own inquiry into the investment group's activities across the region, citing the pattern of conduct documentation that Hale had submitted. Walter Briggs resigned from the County Land Use Advisory Board on a Thursday morning, quietly, without explanation, and his name stopped appearing in conversations about regional development in the way it had appeared before. The State Water Board formally designated the Caldwell Aquifer as a protected regional water resource, which meant that any future attempt to commercialize or transfer the water rights would require state-level approval under standards that the investment group's prospectus could not meet. Emma rebuilt the south corner of the barn properly, with good lumber and new roofing, the work going faster because 3 of Whitaker's ranchers came out on a Saturday and worked alongside her without being asked to. Davis Crane found work with a livestock operation in Missoula. He called Emma once, 2 months later, to tell her his daughter had asked him if he was a good person. He had told her he was trying to be. She had said that was good enough. Margaret Hooper came back to the ranch in June. She stood at the corral fence and watched Shadow move across the field with the other horses, and Emma stood beside her, and neither of them said anything for a long time. Then Margaret said, "He's magnificent." "He always was," Emma said. "People just needed time to see it." Margaret looked at her. "Is that what you think? That people needed time?" Emma considered it honestly. "No," she said. "I think some people would have needed all the time in the world, and still wouldn't have seen it. I think some things only reveal themselves to the people who are willing to stay." Whitaker brought the partnership proposal formally in July. 3 ranchers, a shared working arrangement that would use the Caldwell horses on terrain that their equipment could not handle, with compensation structured as service fees that gave Emma a reliable income stream without requiring her to sell anything she had promised herself she would not sell. She negotiated the terms herself. Hale reviewed them. She signed on a Tuesday morning at the kitchen table where her grandfather had written his journals, and she thought about how he would have read the contract, slowly, carefully, making sure the language meant exactly what she intended it to mean, and nothing she did not. Samuel witnessed the signing. He wrote his name in the steady, deliberate hand of someone who understood the weight of signatures. By the end of that first year, the Caldwell Ranch had a working income, a legally protected water source, a documented horse bloodline of significant value, and a reputation in Red Willow County that was the precise opposite of the one that had been assigned to it at a county auction on a cold February morning. People came to see the horses, not to buy them, to understand them. Young ranchers who had heard what the black horses could do on mountain terrain. Families who had heard the story in the way stories travel in small communities. Imperfectly, with embellishment, but with the essential truth intact. Agricultural researchers interested in the hydrological documentation. A journalist from Billings who wrote a piece that ran in 2 state papers under the headline, "Montana Woman Fights Water Rights Battle and Wins." Emma read the headline and thought it was not quite right. It implied that winning was the end of something. She had come to understand that winning was just the point at which the real work became possible. On the 1-year anniversary of the auction, Emma rode Shadow up the mountain trail. Just the 2 of them. No Samuel, no documentation kit, no legal purpose. She rode in the early morning when the light was still low and the trail was quiet, and Shadow moved beneath her with the effortless confidence of something doing exactly what it was built to do, in exactly the terrain it was built to do it in. They reached the survey point. The cairn of 3 stones was still there, the brass markers on the trees, the damp ground that spoke of what moved far below. Emma dismounted. She stood at the cairn and looked at the stone with her grandfather's name in her mind, and his voice in her memory, and the whole long reach of his 40-year preparation at her back. She had not cried at the auction. She had not cried in the truck on the way home. She had not cried when she read his letter for the first time, or when she found the map, or when the fire lit up the barn roof, or when the TRO was served at her gate, or when Fenwick looked up from his notes and said the words that ended it. She cried now. She stood on the mountain with Shadow beside her, and the whole valley spread out below, and she let it move through her. The grief and the gratitude and the exhaustion and the strange, specific pride of having done a thing that mattered, of having been the person her grandfather believed she was, of having stayed when staying was the hardest option and the right one. Shadow stood perfectly still beside her. He did not move away. He did not shift or pull at the reins. He simply stood, patient and present, the way a good horse stands when the person beside them needs them to be there. After a while, Emma wiped her face. She put her hand on Shadow's neck. "All right," she said. "Let's go home." They rode down the mountain together, through the spring morning, through the trail that the horses remembered, through the land that her grandfather had spent 40 years protecting and had passed to her with the only instruction that ever truly mattered. Stay. Understand. Protect what comes after you. The 15 black horses that nobody wanted had become the foundation of something that would outlast every person involved in the story of them. The land remembered. The trail remembered. The water moved beneath the mountain the way it had been moving for 10,000 years, patient and purposeful, entirely indifferent to the small human dramas playing out above it, entirely worth protecting. Emma Caldwell had driven to Red Willow County with $43 and a grief-worn letter and no plan. And she had discovered that the plan had already been made, built across 40 years of patience and love, by a man who had known that the strongest things are often the ones nobody has patience enough to understand. She had been patient. She had understood. And that had made all the difference.